Warning. The following podcast features views and opinions that are likely to trigger the extreme fanboys and fangirls who disagree with them. Listener discretion is advised.
Dread it, run from it, destiny arrives all the same. And of course, by destiny, I mean another amazing episode of Hot Takes with Billy Biz. But today is a very special episode because usually on this show, we're just going over one movie. Today, we're not going over one movie, not even a trilogy. We are going through the entire MCU. We're going to talk about every single one of them, and we're going to give an official, our official ranking at the very end. Who's we, you are asking? Well, it's a very, very special occasion because I have brought along none other than Mrs. Business in the house.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be talking about this, and I'm so excited for Endgame.
So let's talk a little bit about the MCU and a little bit about Marvel and your experience, because when we first got together, this was around 2013, you had maybe seen a couple, but a handful you just kind of refused to watch.
Yeah, I don't know. I just wasn't into it at first. I had seen a few movies. I think the one that stood out the most for me was the first Avengers, and I think I saw that even before we were together.
It must have been. It was like a year before.
But I remember going to see that with my stepmom. I'm like, oh, yeah, it was a really fun movie. Loved it.
No context to like what was happening before.
And no attachment to really like the whole story that was going to unfold with all these characters.
Sure. But then of course, I remember they kept coming out, and eventually I got you to go see them, at least the new ones in the theaters, and then you got hooked. So I feel like it's not safe to or fair to say that you're like a casual, like Joe Schmo fan, but you're also not like super, like you've never really read the comics or anything like that, right?
You know, I started to kind of read the comics, or at least the abridgment of whatever I found on Google.
Sure.
And
the Wikipedia.
Yeah. Just because I wanted to learn more about certain characters that I was interested in. But yeah, I'm not an amateur, but I'm not an expert by any means either.
You're a little like intermediate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like when Thanos popped up at the end of Avengers, you're like, I know exactly who and what that means, right?
No, yeah. Couldn't care less. I could care less.
But of course, we care a lot now. Like she said, Avengers Endgame is on its way. So what better time to take a look back at everything that's come before. So let's just go movie by movie, because there are, as of this recording, 21 of them that have been released so far. Let's start with 2008, Jon Favreau's Iron Man. This is the one that kicked it all off. This was the one that people were like, this is a revelation. I remember at the time that this came out, I really, really liked it, but I just felt bad for any movie coming out that summer because everyone, myself included, was just waiting for The Dark Knight to come out. So every movie that came out, I was like, yeah, that's good, but is it almost time for Dark Knight yet? So when I saw this, I feel like I didn't cast it aside or brush it off, but it was like, that was cool, I really liked it. Okay, now Dark Knight. And it wasn't until like later on that I could go back and watch this without kind of... summer of 2008 was the Dark Knight summer for me.
Yeah, Iron Man was not on my radar. Because I was super into Dark Knight as well, and that whole Batman trilogy was just my end-all be-all as far as superhero movies were concerned. I actually didn't really care about anything else. Although, I do remember seeing Iron Man, and I remember really liking that. I thought it was a really good superhero movie, and aside from Batman, I was like, oh yeah, I can get on board with this. But again, at that point, I wasn't really attached to anything more than that, so I was able to enjoy it for what it was.
I still really I still think Iron Man holds up incredibly well. I do think, though, people still put this like on such a pedestal, and it is kind of it's just an origin story. It's a really well done origin story, but it has the same third act problems, or not problems, but kind of just like, all right, I get it. You have to do your big third act set piece, and like it still follows the same tropes. I guess it's just the charm of Robert Downey Jr. just kind of pushes it a little bit further. But
he carries it for sure. But I guess what else would you want in the third act besides it just needs the setup.
Sure, I'm just saying, like, and there's nothing wrong with Iron Man whatsoever. I just think it's one of those things where people called it, like, revolutionary, and it's not revolutionary. It's just very, very well done.
I don't know if revolutionary is the right word, although I think it's above just well done too. I didn't really get an appreciation for the first Iron Man until after more of the movies were coming out and I realized there was like a whole story forming. And going back and watching the first Iron Man, I think I was more in awe of it because it did tell such a great beginning to the whole series of what was going to happen. Especially for Tony Stark. I think it was really cool the way they did it, and how he kind of became the way he was and what his journey was. I think I like learning more about Tony's background more than any other character.
I think this movie, for me personally, has aged better than some of the others. This is one that I get, like, I enjoy revisiting more. Maybe at first I was like, yeah, that's good. And it was like a 7. And then it was like, the next time it was like a 7.2 or a 7.3. Like, it just gets a little bit better from each time. I still don't like Terrence Howard.
Oh, God, don't even get me started on that.
I really, there's nothing about him that makes me think, like, yeah, you are definitely like a colonel. You know, like, you're not. Like, Terrence Howard, I'm sorry, I'm so glad he's not in the rest of them.
The common theme of me not liking certain movies or certain things throughout the whole Avengers
Terrence
saga. Because you said Terrence Howard, but like the theme for me is like I tend to block out and not remember things that I don't like, and I didn't remember he was in that until you just said it. So
he just is like I think he was incredibly miscast. I was so glad later on that they replaced him. But look, other than that, I think it's a very solid Iron Man. I think it's a really, like you said, it's a really solid start. And what I will say is revolutionary about Iron Man 1, now this was not the first movie, obviously, to do a post-credit scene, but I feel like it's the first movie that did a post-credit scene that really, like, was a game changer, that had stakes, that meant something, that it wasn't just like, oh yeah, if you get it on DVD, you should check out. It's kind of funny at the end of this movie they did this thing. It's like, no, you have to see that moment, because that moment is what it's going to all be about coming later.
right.
The other thing about this movie is I had a friend who was working production in Iron Man, and they said this movie is a mess. Like, making this movie, it's a mess. They go off script. There kind of isn't really a script. I don't know how this is going to be cut together. And then somehow in the editing room with, you know, Robert Downey Jr. just doing his thing, they were able to, like, craft this really good movie out of it. It's usually when you hear there's script problems on set and they're just kind of going all over the place, it's not a happy ending for that movie.
Yeah, in a weird way, I think what makes it work is not necessarily like how Tony Stark came to be Tony Stark, but it's the origin story of the technology he was able to build, you know, and that's what's most fascinating for me is seeing how he built everything, you know, with as few materials as he had, in that situation he was in the first movie, and how he created it and brought it to life and carried it out through, you know, his whole superhero-dom. That was probably the most interesting thing.
So that is the kicking off point. It doesn't seem like it now, but a month after Iron Man 1 came out, we got the next installment in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You could literally walk from Iron Man over to the theater for The Incredible Hulk. This is 2008. Edward Norton starred and co-wrote this one. This one seems to be the redheaded stepchild of the MCU. This is the one that there was a video at Comic-Con in 2017. It was introducing Michelle Pfeiffer to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They had Luis from Ant-Man, and he was doing his little gimmick of telling funny, you know, stories in a funny way, and he was retelling the story of the MCU from the beginning. And when it got to Incredible Hulk, he's just like, I don't know, I didn't see that one. And then they kept going. So it's weird because they don't necessarily want to acknowledge this one, yet they haven't completely thrown it out. It's referenced in the Avengers. Obviously, Ross comes back in both Civil War and Infinity War. I don't think it's that bad. I don't think it's like this abomination, no pun intended, that they make it out to be.
At the time when it came out, I didn't think it was that bad. Like Hulk is by far my favorite superhero in the Marvel universe.
Really?
Yeah.
Why Hulk?
I just love that he turns into something that's so invincible. Like he's bulletproof. He's can like basically crush anything, and it takes a lot to like take him down.
Right.
There's something about that I wish I had it. That's like if I could choose any superpower, it would be the Hulk.
Out.
Oh yeah.
But you're not even in control when you do it.
That's okay.
Okay. So at the time it came out, people seem to like it better than 2003's Hulk with Ang Lee's Hulk with Eric Bana. But still, I feel like this one kind of just came and went, especially on the heels of Iron Man. It didn't necessarily get the same traction that Iron Man had.
No, it was kind of blah to me. And that's why I think I was so disappointed, because I love this character so much. And yeah, the other one that had previously come out, the Ang Lee one, I liked a little bit better. The one with Ed Norton, again, I have trouble like remembering what happens because it seems so insignificant to me. But
I mean, they've certainly made it that way.
Yeah.
I think Tim Roth is a great villain in that movie. Like,
I love Tim Roth.
He's so great in it.
He's great in
and then he
everything.
has this kind of like, the Hulk, it's like almost like this Moby Dick thing where he's just like, I've got to take this thing down. What is this thing? I do think Liv Tyler was a little bit of a wet blanket. I think
she's the one that I actually didn't mind of everything.
That movie?
Yeah.
I mean,
she just played her role. She was good.
She was fine, but
Yeah.
they didn't really have a lot for Betty to do, which is I wonder if that's why we actually haven't not only not seen her since that, we haven't even heard her mentioned. Like she hasn't even been brought up since the Incredible Hulk, and she was a big part of Hulk's life or Bruce's life at that point, and it's now just.
Did they like break up at the end? I don't even remember.
I mean, he leaves because it's just not safe for the Hulk to be around anyone.
So she's
by
doing
the
her
time,
own thing. She's married with kids. She's just,
Yeah,
there's
I don't
no
know. It's
explanation.
just weird if like Tony went away and then he came back like a couple movies later and like Pepper was like, oh, I got married and did my own thing. You're like, but you're for Tony.
Sure. I mean, I think. To me, when I think about the Hulk, it just seems like they didn't really know what they were doing at the time when they were making it. So it's good for the origin story. Like the origin story for Hulk is pretty basic, and
I mean, they knock it out pretty much in the opening credits.
Yeah, and that's it. That's what I'm saying. Like the opening credits, I remember that, and I remember a scene where they're like fighting the Hulk with a tank in like a field, and that's all you need to know about. That's
pretty
story.
much that's pretty much it. Because the one thing I do like about the Incredible Hulk, which is something that they kind of get at a little bit by the first Avengers, and then by Age of Ultron, it's almost completely like dropped. But it's like Edward Norton brings this like, I've got to get rid of this thing. Like he treats the Hulk as like a disease, like an incurable disease, and he is frantically obsessed with trying to get rid of the Hulk. And then when Mark Ruffalo comes in, as Ruffalo keeps going, it just becomes like, yeah, I guess I'll just put on my Hulk costume. And that's fine because it's the evolution of the character. But I think like I like that darkness of the Incredible Hulk, which the Hulk is kind of missing a little bit throughout the rest of the MCU.
I feel like he still has some of that darkness when you see him again in the first Avengers.
Right. He talks about how he wanted to commit suicide, which was a deleted scene from The Incredible Hulk.
Yeah.
That was the alternate opening. I guess it was just a little too intense for...
I mean, you have to remember, too, like, he goes away. He's kind of he's in another country for a while. You can kind of imagine that he's been kind of harnessing his chi or whatever you want to call it. Like,
right.
And he has practiced a lot, so he's a more mature Hulk.
He's definitely like a different guy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, literally a different guy by Avengers, but he's definitely like, even like you just get the sense that, he's definitely like somehow between the end of Incredible Hulk and then the Avengers, he's accepted that that's what he is and is going to try to just live with it. Yeah, look, a lot of people put Incredible Hulk towards the very, very bottom as just like a misfire. I don't think it's a misfire. I think it's good. I don't think it's great. I also was super excited at the time to see that Tony Stark cameo at the very end, because that was like really the first time that I was like, oh, we're not joking. Like, we're really like...
We're getting into this.
Yeah, we're really going to tie all these together, which was exciting in itself. So yeah, I don't think Incredible Hulk deserves to be at the very bottom, which I know a lot of people put it there, but I think it's pretty good.
Mine's the bottom 3.
Yeah, okay. Well,
yeah, but I think for me, with the bottom ones, it's not like they're a misfire, like you say. I just think the lower rankings for me are the most non-rewatchable.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, look, for the most part, I'll still watch like a bad quote unquote MCU movie over some of the other, like over, I don't know, Pacific Rim Uprising or something.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? All right, so from there, we get a year off from any sort of Marvel movie. This would be, to date, the last time that there would be a break, at least year-wise, for Marvel movies, potentially in 2020. We don't know yet. But that takes us to 2010, Iron Man 2. The history has not been kind to Iron Man 2. Many Marvel fans call this the worst Marvel movie. It's a toss-up between this and another one. I don't think Iron Man 2's that bad. I don't know why it gets so much hate.
I don't think it's that bad, but it's my least favorite of all 3 Iron Man movies.
Really?
Yeah, I even have Iron Man 3 above Iron Man 2 in my ranking.
So here's the thing. One of the biggest criticisms of Iron Man 2, people say that it's just filler, that it's all set up for the Avengers, that it's convoluted. But to me, I feel like there's a couple scenes. Sure, I'll give you. There's a couple scenes that are like, all right, you're priming me for Avengers. Coulson leaving to go to New Mexico is a little awkward, but for the most part, I really enjoy it. You get to see Iron Man being Iron Man, and you get to see War Machine finally join the fray, and Black Widow too.
Yeah, I think it's a good setup. Again, I don't think it's, that bad, because it does give a lot of bridge to the other movies that are coming up. It wasn't really... That's all it was to me.
I think you get, like, for me, I love the action set piece. I love just that it looks different at the World's Fair at the end. Like, I especially love when all those drones come and they're in some, like, garden pavilion. Like, it just looks cool. I think Sam Rockwell is always fun.
Well, yeah, he's the best.
Yeah, Sam Rockwell is the best. So, like, between him and, like... Mickey Rourke just being a weirdo, like,
I think maybe that's another thing too, is when I think of that movie, I only really think of Mickey Rourke and his character. I don't really like the other character stories didn't resonate with me as much as that one. So maybe that's why it's a little off, because it doesn't focus on a character that continues throughout.
I mean, it's definitely trying to fit in a couple different major storylines from the comics. There's a little bit of Demon in the Bottle with Tony kind of, the drunken party and dealing with the fact that this thing that he put in his body to save him is actually killing him. I like the sequence where he has to invent the new element. I know some people just kind of like, why did we spend so much time on this? I don't know. I don't think it's that bad. Like, the stuff at Monaco with the raceway is really fun, and that was the first time too where we saw kind of a different, cooler suit for Iron Man, because usually it was like he had to get in that big contraption and it screwed on him, and this was like that really cool suitcase. Like, I still think that the suitcase armor and that whole sequence holds up.
So yeah, it's an evolution of the technology.
Yeah, which I think is really cool. And also, like, the evolution of his technology too, with just now, like, we know that his suits are going to be even more super powered because he found a new element. We get a little bit of, not a lot, but we get a little bit of, like, the, dealing with, obviously the relationship with his dad, which was, always been a troubled one for Tony. And then, yeah, it does give us a little bit of a kickoff into Avengers, but nothing crazy. There's nothing that comes out of Avengers that's like, oh, duh, Iron Man 2 told me. Like, I just feel like people set this one up as if, like, Iron Man 2 is a 2-hour commercial for Avengers, which I don't think it is.
No, but it served its purpose as, another setup movie. I think very similar to Hulk.
To Incredible Hulk?
Yeah.
To just get it out. And...
Yeah.
So 2010, we got Iron Man 2. I think it's better than people say it is. I think you sound like you're kind of in line with the general consensus.
It's in the middle. Like, it works for me because I think I just love Iron Man, and I liked all the characters, and it moved. Wasn't the best, but I don't think it was the worst.
That takes us into 2011. We got 2 that summer. The first one was Thor. This was, oddly enough, directed by Kenneth Branagh, which sounds like, that doesn't sound right, but it is. A lot of...
he's good.
He's great, but it's just like, why is Kenneth Branagh, who does like Hamlet and all these things, doing Thor? That's kind of weird.
It showed through that Kenneth Branagh, who does...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And it did not work for me. And I love Kenneth Branagh.
I think Thor, the first Thor, is actually one of my favorites of the MCU.
Oh,
and
my goodness.
I know I'm in the minority here, but I definitely think this was the first great villain of the MCU with Loki. And I think what made him so great was finding out his true heritage, that he's actually a frost giant. He's not one of the Asgardians. Actually gives him some pathos. It gives him like reasons for what he's doing other than just, like Mickey Rourke. It's like his dad got screwed by Stark. It's like, oh, okay. Or it's like Obadiah Stane got screwed by Stark. Okay. Like, this point, like, the villains felt very cookie cutter, and here comes Loki, and you're like, I kind of feel bad for that guy.
Loki is the only thing that saved this movie from being the very bottom of my ranking. I mean, it's just above Thor 2, but we'll get to that later.
But why is this one just sticking your craw so much? Because I remember this was one of the first ones that I tried to get you to watch, and you like fell asleep 10 minutes in.
You know what? This is such a petty thing to not like about it, but his bleached eyebrows, Thor's bleached eyebrows, they're so distracting to me that I just cannot get into the storyline.
To be fair, Kevin Feige has gone on record saying if he could undo one thing that they've made in these movies, it would be the bleached eyebrows.
It was a huge mistake.
It was a mistake. But it's not bad enough for me to be like, screw this movie. I hate it.
Just like, where are his eyebrows? His face just looks like a blank canvas with weird dark eyes.
Yeah, it's a little... Look, it's especially too because like starting with... I don't think it's there for the first Avengers movie. But definitely Thor the Dark World, he looks very different, but you can't put your finger on why until later. You're like, oh, his hair's actually real this time because he grew out his hair and he has eyebrows again.
Yeah, no, it's so strange. But yeah, like Loki, I think that was the only reason I was willing to watch it, is because Loki has always been one of my favorite characters too, and he's my favorite villain. I mean, I don't even know if I would call him a villain. I think just a character in general, just because he has such an interesting arc throughout the rest of the movies too. But you're right. I like finding out like his whole past and how he came to be part of, Thor's family, and how he came to Asgard, and that's something I'm really happy that they spent time on. And for the rest of, his character in the other movies. I
also think having Anthony Hopkins in this movie, like, when I think of, like, 2 of the best scenes of this movie, it's Thor being banished, and then Loki confronting Odin that he knows what happened. And, like, just like you said, it's very Shakespearean. It's very, it's very deep, and the acting that he's able to get out of these actors in those scenes, kind of unparalleled to anything else in the MCU until much, much later. I think that was like the first really great performances, like acting. Like, look, I love Robert Downey Jr. Robert Downey Jr. is kind of Robert Downey Jr. in all those movies.
Oh, yeah.
But I feel like getting those performances out of like Tom Hiddleston and Chris Hemsworth, there's a story too that after they did the banishment scene, that the crew just gave everyone in that scene a standing ovation because it was just such a powerful moment. So I really love that. I really love the fish out of water stuff. This is also like one of the first movies where it's like, usually in these origin stories, it's like a normal guy and or a normal girl, and we have to kind of wait a while for them to get their powers, and then they're their person. But this, it's like we start with all the powers, and then they get it taken away, which I thought was just kind of a fun little twist on that.
And that's what I think what's interesting about Thor. And then that whole whimsy just gets stripped away when you meet Natalie Portman's character.
She's, yeah, you know what? I'm
really hard on this movie. Sorry.
Both those Thor movies, I am not a fan of Kat Dennings' character.
Yeah, and you know what? It sucks because I really love Kat Dennings and I love Natalie Portman as actors, but it's like for Natalie Portman, it reminds me of like when she was in the Star Wars movies. You know, it's just like this is not serious enough for me. I'm so uncomfortable. Like, what do I do with myself? And it's like, yeah, it's like, yeah, you shouldn't be here. You're it's not your world.
It's also like I'll give you that, you know, everything in New Mexico feels like the backlot tour at Universal Studios. Like it's like one street. Like it's very small.
Yeah.
Especially compared to what you're gonna see later. Also, there's a lot of Dutch angles in this movie. A lot of Dutch angles, and it's like almost it's like Battlefield Earth level Dutch angles. But I still love this movie. I still think it's one of the stronger origin stories of all of them. It did fairly well, but you have to remember at the time when these Marvel movies were coming out, like Iron Man was a pretty big hit, and Iron Man 2 was a hit, but these weren't. Like, if you go and look now at, like, Box Office Mojo, like, these weren't grossing, like, you know, billions like they do now. So this was still kind of like, Avengers was still going to be, like, the litmus test if this would really work. But we had to get Thor out. Thor also introduces this concept of if you have something magical or mystical in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there's some sort of based in science root to it. We don't understand it. Like that whole scene where he's like, you call it magic on my planet, I would call this science. Like, you know,
yeah.
And I think that was important to kind of establish at this point, especially if you're going to start to get into like aliens and all the cosmic stuff, that it's like this stuff exists out there. Earth and humans are just too primitive to know exactly what it is.
Right.
Which is a hard thing to do.
I appreciate that aspect of it too. I think that's something that I just forget about, but you make a good point.
So we got another one a couple months later. This was in July. We got Captain America, the First Avenger. Oh boy, the first time I saw a trailer for this, the very first thing they show is little skinny Chris Evans, and I was like, oh no.
It's very, you know, reminiscent of kind of what they, you know, looking back and like rewatching the Incredible Hulk again, you're like, oh, this CGI is terrible.
Yeah.
The same thing with this one. It's just like, oh, you didn't quite nail it, but
I
guess it works.
It looks okay when he has clothes on. When he takes his shirt off, you're like, ugh.
You know what it is? There's just something weird that they did with his jaw that it's like, that's where it doesn't seem like his head is connected to his body. It's just kind of pasted on. It's like,
it looks
maybe if you like gave him a little bit more of like a, I don't know. There's something with the jaw and the neck that's like, it just doesn't work.
It just looks like a bobblehead,
yes.
kind of. All that to say, this was a movie when I saw it in the best possible circumstance you could see it. I saw it at a screening at San Diego Comic-Con that year, so you're just in a theater with all the fans. And I remember I wasn't overwhelmed, but I wasn't underwhelmed. I was perfectly whelmed.
You're whelmed.
when I saw it. This is another one, kind of like the first Iron Man, that like, it's not the first one I'll grab if I want to watch a Marvel movie, but when I do watch it, I tend to like it just a little bit more each time I see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny looking back. Like, I'm coming from the point of view of like after seeing like the first Avengers and going back and looking at all these origin stories, like they all kind of struggled a little bit. But I mean, they're so necessary, so it's hard for me to knock this one. I really did not like this one the first time I saw it. I think you had to force me to watch it just to get some understanding of what was happening in all the storylines. And it was informational, but the first time I was bored to death. And now rewatching it, I think because I've grown to love Captain America so much, and appreciate his character and how he like carries all the movies, it's grown on me for sure.
Yeah, I definitely think you know, coming out of Captain Marvel, where people were like, oh man, this is the hero that's going to lead the movies moving forward. A lot of people were for it, a lot of people not quite into Captain Marvel, but it's always, you have to say like, well, remember Captain America. That first movie came out and a lot of people were split on that one too. It wasn't anyone's really favorite. But you learn to love Steve Rogers so much as the movies go that when you come back and visit this one, it just kind of has a new charm to it. Like the added context of what comes after helps this one a lot.
I think that's what's problematic in these origin stories kind of culminating together later. They're not origin stories that can stand alone. And I think maybe that's why people had a hard time really loving them. Their main purpose was just to give background to the eventual storytelling.
I mean, it's like, yeah, you had to know, especially, I think...
And that's why people like it now, you know?
I think Thor was one that was definitely like, we have to get this movie out as quickly as possible because if, once Avengers comes, no one knows who Thor is. People know who Captain America is. Maybe they were vaguely aware that he was like a super soldier, but that was one where it was like...
That was me. I didn't really...
Right, but it's like, you know the iconography of Captain America. Thor, you don't. Iron Man, certainly no one did. Hulk, you did. I think you could have gotten away with throwing Hulk in Avengers the way he's in there and not necessarily needing that origin, because a lot of people, older people, remember the TV show with Lou Ferrigno, and you just kind of know, like, the common, like, just the idioms of, like, hulking out and all that stuff. But I think Captain America, the first Avenger, there's a lot of cool stuff in it, stuff that pays off 18, 19 movies later. Definitely the first time that we really get a good sense of what the Tesseract can do, which becomes like the biggest MacGuffin next to just the Gauntlet itself in all these movies. I mean, I can't even count how many movies the Tesseract ended up showing up in before you realize that is one of the stones.
Right.
Also, I kind of like that. I like that bookend of it. When you think of Captain America, the first Avenger, you think of kind of like this kind of fun, pulpy, like war type movie. But I think people forget that it ends on a really like melancholy.
It's a really
downer.
intense movie, an intense storyline. Captain America is definitely, dare I say, tragic hero-like.
I think him and Thor are battling right now for most tragic Marvel hero.
Yeah.
Thor might take the cake because just everyone he knows has died. Like everyone's dead, but so kind of so is Steve, and it's just so sad when he realizes in that last 5 seconds of the movie, like, I'm never gonna get to see Peggy again. Yeah. Not like I thought I would. I
mean, I was just disappointed. I was like, has this guy ever gotten laid? Because
I don't.
It's the only thing I think about with Captain America. I'm like, I hope he's like gotten laid at this point.
There's like a fan theory going around that in between Civil War and Infinity War, when Cap and his like people are going around doing like secret missions off the books, that kind of like when Vision and Wanda hooked up every now and then, that maybe him and that agent were hooking up.
Oh,
the one that he kisses for 5 seconds.
Peggy's niece?
Yeah.
Which, that's kind of weird.
It is a little weird.
Yeah, but, I mean, at least he's getting something.
He's got a type.
The poor guy, he just has so much wrong with his life. Like, give him a little something, please.
Maybe he did. Maybe that's
I like to think so.
Maybe he lost his V card and then he's like, I'm a man now, I can grow a beard. Maybe the beard is like just more like it's symbolic.
The change, yeah.
Like, okay, he's definitely done it now. All right, so we got through all the origin stories. 2012. At the time, it was pretty unprecedented. There have been smaller scale of a shared universe. You think back to like Kevin Smith's View Askew, like Jay and Silent Bob, where all those characters from those movies convene, but nothing on this scale. We saw Thor, Iron Man, Hulk, Captain America, Black Widow, and Hawkeye all together in 2012's The Avengers. In a reverse of what I said at the very beginning, where 2008 I saw I saw Iron Man, I was like, all right, that's good, now give me Dark Knight. Here now we have the polar opposite. It's The Avengers are first, and then Dark Knight Rises is a couple months later, and I walk out of Dark Knight Rises, I'm like, I liked it a lot. wasn't the Avengers. Like in 4 years, I had done a complete about face. But this movie, I still, to this day, like, I don't know if it's nostalgia goggles or if it really just is that great, but it's like, I still feel that sense of like, wow, I can't believe Captain America and Tony Stark are in the same scene together.
No, it really was amazing. And when I had seen Avengers, mind you, I had only seen Iron Man 1 at this point, and Hulk, but whatever. The Avengers, the first Avengers movie, I had gone to see it just, without really understanding who anyone else was besides Iron Man and Hulk. And I was able to really get everything without having those other movies to back it up. I don't know. For me, I think it's like I love movies where there's just like a big group of people just like working together. Like it moves me to the point of tears. That's the only thing I cry at in movies.
Teamwork.
Yeah, no, seriously.
Are you just like a wreck at like Mighty Ducks?
Oh my God. You know, like you'll look at me.
Movie?
Yeah, I'm like crying because I'm like, oh my God, they're working together. And that's also another movie where like finally I get the Hulk that I want.
Right.
And I totally fell in love with Mark Ruffalo's Hulk. He was a perfect pick for me. And you really got to see him in action the way I think that Hulk was supposed to be the whole time. And it really still was like a Tony Stark movie to me for the most part. And I think that's why like I didn't really need the other background stories because we already run through Iron Man. It kind of know, the other ones like, okay, they're just there. They're all helping out. Great. But I didn't really have any attachment to them at this point either. It really was just like, okay, I'm following Tony throughout this whole thing. And those other people are just, yeah, they're there.
It's this movie is able to accomplish something that very few movies can do where it kind of has 3 or 4 leads. And it's funny that you say like, yeah, this was a Tony Stark movie and everyone's helping him. Whereas to me, I'm like, this is a Captain America movie where everyone else, he's like has to like adjust to everyone else. And you could even make the case like this is a Thor movie where he has to go get his brother and he has to deal with everybody else. Like the fact that like this juggles multiple POVs, multiple storylines, multiple characters, but also has to be satisfying to people who've been on this journey so far, and it has to be satisfying to people who are just jumping in right now. It's tough to do. It's really tough to do.
Yeah.
And the fact that that Joss Whedon was kind of able to pull this all together and make a movie that I still think, look, is it the most complex and emotionally deep of the Marvel movies? Not even close. But is it like...
It doesn't need to be.
It doesn't need to be. The spectacle is just that whole last 40 minutes of the Battle of New York.
I was beside myself.
Yeah, it's just incredible. And you get to, like, there's so much, usually this is said in a negative term, but there's so much fan service. Just that one shot that has no cuts, but you get to see every Avenger kind of doing their thing. And Tony Stark flies and he uses his repulsor ray off and it bounces off of Cap's shield. And then you pan up and Hawkeye's...
Cue my tears.
Right, yeah. Like, it's just like everything, like your jaws drop, especially like someone like me and a lot of fans who had been reading these comics and watching these cartoons all our lives. Like, well, it sucks that you can never really make a movie of this. And then someone did it.
Right.
Like, that was incredible to me. It's funny. It does have heart. It does feel like, not that anyone would want to, but if you had to, you could stop there and feel like there was a bow on it and you feel pretty good.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Because you actually see the character growth with all of them too. It's not just like a flat movie where they're just fighting all together. But Marvel Universe and superheroes aside, I remember walking out of that movie with my stepmom going, wow, that was just a great movie on its own.
It's such a crowd pleaser, and it holds up on repeat viewings. Even when you know what's going to happen and you've seen what comes much later down the line, there's still something that this movie still feels like an event all these years later. So yeah, huge achievement. And that's really when I think people, when they think of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and like, everything that comes out now that's Marvel is like $800 to $1 billion grosser. It's like Avengers was the first one that really, really like took it to another level.
Yeah.
That was the first $1 billion Marvel movie or grosser worldwide. And the movies that came after it, I mean, they got the Avengers rub, but there's no other way to say it. Like, despite the merits of those next few movies, the next few ones did get the awareness now is even up. Like, hey, these Avengers movies are pretty cool. Mm-hmm. But also people were thinking, how are people going to respond now to go seeing solo movies knowing that there is a team-up version? Do I just wait for the team-up again?
Right.
That all kind of led into the next movie, which was the very next summer, which was 2013's Iron Man 3. The first two Iron Man movie directed by Jon Favreau. This one was directed by Shane Black, who you may know from Kiss Kiss Bang Bang and all those other types of movies. Shane Black has his own style.
Yeah, and you can see that. I think that's why I enjoyed it, because I do enjoy his style. And you get back to some more, why is Tony the way he is in this story. And I really liked the villain. I thought he was really compelling.
Aldrich Killian?
Yeah.
So for me, and I'll give a little bit on this, but I'm going to hold back a little bit because I am going to do a separate episode just on Iron Man 3 with Eric Goldman coming soon. But Iron Man 3 is towards my very bottom. It might be last, if not for another one. But Iron Man 3 for me is just a huge swing and a miss. Tons of missed opportunities. I love the first 10 minutes of this movie, and then they abandon it pretty hardcore. I love the idea of Tony suffering PTSD from what we just saw. Mm-hmm. But then it's either played for laughs or not touched upon at all, really, for the rest of this movie. And that's such an interesting deconstruction that at the time no other superhero movies would have even had the ability to touch, of how would something so earth-shattering as figuring out there's aliens and flying through a wormhole with a nuke, like what would that actually do to you on a day-to-day basis? And they start to answer that question, and then they just kind of give up.
I mean, I don't know if they really give up on it, because I think the way it morphs is, kind of tying into his and Pepper's relationship and how it's affecting, it's straining, their day-to-day.
Which is all within that first chunk of the movie. But then as soon as the bombs or, the mansion gets destroyed, it's almost like it becomes a weird, Tony Stark action detective movie that has nothing to do with what you set up.
I mean, I guess I can see your point if you're just looking at the movie by itself. I think it carries over into other movies. Maybe that's why I'm so accepting of it. I don't know. I think it's because it happens. It's kind of left hanging, and you're just kind of like, what's going to happen? I think maybe that's why I was still attached to it throughout the end. Because I wanted to see how Tony was going to deal with all of it. But, as much as that story is brought out in this movie, in that one scene, to your point, I don't know if it was the focus for me.
I just feel also, too, it's look, a lot of people were very upset with the Mandarin twist, that the Mandarin was actually an actor, and it wasn't Ben Kingsley after all this marketing had been sold. And I loved the marketing. I loved the "you'll never see me coming."
I hate the way people speak like that. I don't know about people, but
I was like, do you know someone that speaks like Ben Kingsley's Mandarin?
No, I think I was telling you the other day I was listening to an audiobook who had that same
cadence.
Yeah, and it's the most annoying thing to me.
But at that point, no one really had a villain like that, and it was a way to ground let's call it for what it is, a very racist in the comics character,
right.
And just kind of this outlandish, supernatural character. It looks like they were taking this way of grounding him into this terrorist that, we could relate to on a Osama bin Laden or ISIS type level, and making it real world and tying together all the Easter eggs of the 10 rings and the Mandarin that they had sprinkled throughout the first Iron Man movie. And then they just took a big fat dump on it about halfway through that movie. And then and that's the thing too. It's in hindsight, you know that Guy Pearce is the villain because they just rehash even the wig. They rehash Jim Carrey's Riddler Edward Nygma thing from the beginning of Batman Forever,
Right.
where he's just this nerdy scientist with a bad wig and long hair, and he's obsessed with our hero, and the hero rebukes him, and then he wants his revenge, and then he turns into a good-looking technological businessman, wealthy tycoon. It's like, yeah, I saw this movie like 10 years ago. It's called Batman Forever.
Maybe that's why I liked it so much.
It's also funny to me that almost everything in Iron Man 3 has some way or another been retconned. It's like Tony destroys all his suits. Never mind, he's got suits in the next one. Rhodey is now no longer War Machine. He's Iron Patriot. Never mind, he's War Machine again. Oh, this guy is just an actor. There's no Mandarin. Never mind. They literally shot a short to put on the Blu-ray called All Hail the King, which it's like the real Mandarin doesn't like that you're using his name. Like they went out of their way to like retcon this entire movie. And I actually think if you're doing a rewatch of all the MCU and you just don't have time, you can cut this one out and literally nothing changes.
You're right. But I think the reason I still enjoy it is because it does kind of focus on like Tony and Pepper's relationship, and I actually personally like when Pepper suddenly has powers at the end. Like I think that's what it was. Like it's just like a dramatic romance problem that I could just watch.
Yeah, so Iron Man 3, this one is very divisive. Some people really love it. Some people, like me, really, really dislike it. But when I talked about that getting a rub from the Avengers, this one of, to date, still the highest grossing single films. This was definitely over $1 billion that this one made. So, look, Iron Man, the brand, was still strong at this point. Later that year in November, we come to what many people think is the worst of the MCU, Thor the Dark World.
Oh my god.
This was the sequel.
This is at the very bottom of my ranking.
Now, this one was directed by Alan Taylor, who was chosen because he did a lot of Game of Thrones episodes. He kind of used to that style. Natalie Portman very upset because her choice of director, Patty Jenkins, was not accepted by Marvel. Patty Jenkins, of course, went on to do Wonder Woman, which was a massive hit. Thor the Dark World, I don't hate it. It's also like not super interesting. Like there's good parts to it, but it's also like the whole third act, I'm like, I don't care about any of this.
So you've forced me to watch this movie a couple of times.
I've only when we're doing full rewatches for Infinity War Endgame.
And that's really the only time I've been like, okay, I guess I'll watch it. You had to force me to watch it the first time though. And I think I've seen it like at least 3 times. For the life of me, cannot remember what happens in this movie. It was that insignificant to me.
It's incredibly forgettable.
Yeah.
You have Malekith, the Dark Elf, played by Christopher Eccleston, who I don't really know what he wants the world to be dark, I think. I don't know.
I could not tell you any plot point. I just remember like things from the trailer, like wasn't Thor in like the pond or whatever? Or like a bath.
That's Age of Ultron.
Oh, never mind. Yeah. See, we're not even the same movie. I can't remember anything that happens in Thor 2.
This was the one, I think the most interesting thing, like the parts that I do like about this one are the after, like every movie that came after the Avengers was like, could have been the direct sequel because now you want to find out, all right, Loki just tried to take over Earth. At the very end, Thor's taking him back to Asgard. What's going to happen with Loki? What does Asgardian justice look like? So that part I think is like interesting, that Loki gets locked up for life. And then Thor kind of has to use Loki for help. But man, Annie, like, it's okay. I like Darcy and Natalie Portman, like, kind of annoy me in the first one, but not too bad. But anytime we go to Earth in Thor the Dark World, this film just screeches to a halt. It is so boring when they are on Earth.
Yeah, I wish I had something to say.
You're like, I know I've seen it.
It's a blank.
I feel like every single person in this movie doesn't really want to be there. Like, it's very apparent when you're watching it. Like, I think Tom Hiddleston and Chris Hemsworth have fun with each other, but it's like Anthony Hopkins looks like he can't be bothered. Natalie Portman is very clearly not happy to be there,
Yeah.
especially because her choice of director was probably the right one, Patty
Yeah.
Jenkins. A fun Captain America little cameo, like sort of,
was that?
kind of. When Loki is walking and he's changing different, like changing his body to different things as a joke, he turns into Captain America for 10 seconds. That's probably the most memorable part of this. The reason why you have to watch this when you're doing a watch through is because the ether turns out to be the reality stone. So if you're trying to track where all the stones came from in the movies, there you go.
And yeah, I think that's the only purpose of it for me is like when I'm watching all these movies through to tie things together. You couldn't get me to watch it otherwise.
Which is also strange too, because the ether acts very differently in Thor the Dark World than what we know it does later on, like in terms of like changing reality.
Right.
But I guess it doesn't really matter. The most important part of Thor the Dark World, by far, is that Loki ends up on the throne disguised as Odin, and the post-credit scene where we see them deliver the ether to the Collector, which then in turn, comes up much later. But yeah, it's just...
We had to drag through all of that just to get to those important things at the very end.
This was the point where I think Chris Hemsworth was like, I don't really want to do these.
I do not
anymore.
blame him.
Yeah, I think he's gone on record as saying, like, I just was kind of over it at that point, because Thor at that point was still very serious. He was self-serious. It was still, they got the Game of Thrones director because I think they wanted, like, this is our Game of Thrones,
Right.
like our fantasy.
I mean, the content just doesn't call for that. It's, I think I was so annoyed with, Thor as a comic book character in the first place, because I actually really like learning about like all the Norse gods and how much of a departure it was for like Thor and Loki to be doing all this silly stuff. I'm just like, you can't make this serious. It's not.
Yeah. I mean, Thor the Dark World, kind of a big swing and a miss. If anything, like, it's not so much bad, like, oof, that's bad, as it is just like super forgettable.
Yeah.
Which at this point in the game, like,
not necessary.
Yeah, we don't want forgettable at this point. Then we come into 2014, which on paper I think might be Marvel hitting their creative stride, their creative peak. Two of my favorite Marvel movies, both in the same year. April, we get Captain America: The Winter Soldier, which is so tonally such a departure from the first Captain America movie.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't be any more different. And I think this was the real, like, not box office wise, but I think critical breakout hit where they realized, like, this is more than just a superhero movie. This is also like a really good, like, political thriller spy movie.
Completely agree. I don't even know if when I saw this, like, I connected it to the other stories too. Really, the Winter Soldier scared the crap out of me. He was a really intense villain for this movie as a standalone, and coming to find out what we learn about him and his connection with Captain America, it was really compelling.
Had you forgotten about Bucky by that point, or you hadn't seen?
Oh yeah, so that's for me the first time I ever saw this. I hadn't seen the first Captain America yet. I think that's what kind of forced me to watch the first one, because I was like, ooh, this is so just out of nowhere, like, and it became so dramatic for me that I was like, I need to understand the whole story to really like get the full effect. But it really caught me.
I mean, this movie, first of all, Winter Soldier is a scary character, but they have this like score, the theme.
That's what scares me.
Right, it's this very creepy music, and what they do so effectively is when he finally takes his mask off and Steve sees who it is, silent.
Yeah.
They cut the score out, and that's where that moment just punches you in the gut. Even if you know it's Bucky this whole time, watching Steve figure out that is Bucky after his whole world has collapsed in a day. He is now working for the government, for S.H.I.E.L.D., realizes S.H.I.E.L.D. has been his enemy the entire time, infiltrated by Hydra. So everything that he's questioned, like everything that he's believed and taken orders like a soldier his whole life, he now has to question. And I think like to have such a departure from the first Avenger in your sequel follow-up to it, like that's a big risk to not, because you're going from a World War II movie to a spy thriller set in the modern day. Like, they did a great job of adapting Steve to his new environment.
Yeah, I think it makes Captain America less silly. Like, you make a good point with the score for the Winter Soldier, or the just that thematic motif for him. I think the way this whole movie was scored, like, you don't really hear like a kitschy like superhero motif, throughout
Right.
the rest of the movie. It's pretty straightforward, and they play it like just any old not any old, but like they play it just like a regular movie, and they take it to just a more mature level.
It's funny because when you think of the MCU, the first thing you think of is like quippy and humor.
Right.
And when you rewatch this one, maybe there's a couple chuckles, but it's not played for laughs like some of, like an Iron Man movie, or later on like a Guardians or Ragnarok, like this is deathly serious, but it doesn't feel like it's taking itself too seriously. Like, you take it seriously, and somehow it all works.
I think another thing I like about this movie is the just how they connected Captain America with the Black Widow, and she suddenly became a more likable character to me, and she became more significant in the whole story at this point, for me at least. Before it was kind of like, yeah, again, she's there, like, she didn't have her own origin story, so she just doesn't really get her own little celebration of her being part of the Avengers, and this makes her a little bit more important, which I really liked.
I think of like in Iron Man 2, she's very much just a prop.
Right.
And in the Avengers, she gets a lot of badass moments. So like, I think for Avengers, you definitely don't question her badass cred. Like,
Right.
Why is this girl who has no superpowers in the middle of this fight? Like, oh, she can fight. But in Winter Soldier, they actually stop and they allow the film and the characters to breathe for a minute. I always think of that scene where they're driving
In the
out,
car, that's what I was just thinking of too.
where they're driving out to the compound, and we actually get to like know her a little bit, and her personality.
She doesn't really let anything out, but
Right.
she actually lets herself be a little vulnerable in some way,
Right.
to let Steve in without, again, really revealing anything.
But for a superhero movie to stop and like have a scene like that,
And allow it to happen.
yeah, I think that's what sets things like Winter Soldier apart. Because you walk away feeling like, I know these characters so much more now, and I love the addition of Falcon
He's
to
great.
the roster.
I feel like he could have been a throwaway character easily, but they did a good job of incorporating him.
I also think that Samuel L. Jackson has a tendency in some of these movies to feel like he is sleepwalking through them, and it's just like, I'm gonna say a line and deliver it, and
Is he Southern?
well, I don't know where that came from. Well, down here, partner. I think sometimes, like, but he has like his Sam Jackson cadence, and I think this movie is his best performance in any of the Marvel movies. Like, I really feel like he actually stretches his own acting abilities in this one and like really digs in, where some of the other ones, it's just like, all right, he showed up for 3 days and did his thing and then left. So that was the first one of 2014. Definitely a high mark for Marvel. And then came the movie that everyone was like, how is this going to work? We saw trailers with a talking raccoon and a big walking tree. And here, they're like, I don't know, guys, is this going to work or not? And it ended up being one of their best movies, obviously talking about Guardians of the Galaxy, a property that even me as like a pretty big Marvel fan, like I didn't really know anything about them. No one really knew anything about them, which kind of gave them a blank slate to kind of do what they wanted. I think they blew us all away with Guardians.
I remember seeing the trailer for this, and you hit it on the nose. It's like, you lost me at talking raccoon and big tree. And I pride myself on being able to watch a trailer and knowing if the movie's going to be good or not. This is probably one of 2 or 3 movies that I've been wrong about. I remember, yeah, I did not want to go see this with you. I was like, count me out. Don't want to go with a friend. I can't handle. Probably overly dramatic about not wanting to see a movie, and boy was I wrong, because this totally grabbed me.
I remember it was like a press screening, and because they were trying to get the word out on this one, they needed it. And I saw it, and you're like, no, go without me. And I came home, and I would not shut up about it. You were asleep, and I think I like jostled you awake. I was like, hey, this movie is like the best movie I've seen in a long time. You're like,
I was like, nope, don't talk to me about
it. I don't care. And then I think like 3 or 4 days later, it was like a Wednesday or Thursday night. I was like, just come with me to see it, please. I promise you'll like it. And I remember you walked out, you're like, I liked that a lot. And I think you were downplaying it. But the first time I remember you loving it was when it came out on Blu-ray, and I watched it the day it came out. And you're like, I guess I'll watch it for a minute. And you ended up staying for the entire movie and were crying at the end.
Oh my God. That dude, I know it's such a cliche, but Groot he has my heart.
Yeah.
You know, and I think... Yeah, the things that I saw in the trailer that I was like, I'm going to hate this movie are the things I ended up loving about it. And again, it was like, you have this, built-in team of misfits, and they all kind of come together and work together. That gets me right there. But the thing about this movie too, I think because it wasn't really, it brought you to like a different part of the universe of, the whole Marvel saga. I suddenly was so interested in how everything connected after I saw this movie. And I think I asked you a bunch of questions after, like, so where do they come in? And, how does this work? And when do they eventually meet? Like, I think that's the point where I was like, okay, now I need to see every movie that has happened in the Marvel universe so far so I can piece this together.
Right. I remember it would be like, maybe you would watch a Marvel movie with me. You certainly wouldn't go to a theater, but maybe you'd watch it on TV with me. But after Guardians, it was like, do not see this unless I am with you.
Yeah, I was totally invested after this one.
Look, it's one of those things where it's like the soundtrack blew everyone away. I remember I already decided I love this movie. Like a month before it came out, we went to Disneyland, and right next to Space Mountain, they had what used to be Captain EO and like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, whatever. It was the little theater.
Right.
And then they had like the first 5 minutes maybe of Guardians that they were showing as a preview. And I was like, this movie's going to be amazing. I just know it's going to be amazing. And it was. The soundtrack was great. The characters are great. It's so funny. It's perfectly cast. Mm-hmm. It's probably their best origin movie of any of their movies.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Guardians of the Galaxy, it's in a class of its own. It feels like Star Wars-esque. Like I kind of like, in a way, felt like I watched my generation's Star Wars when I watched it.
It made the rest of the drama and like the action that happens like outside of Earth. It made it more real for what has already happened and what was about to happen. I feel like if you didn't have this movie, it would not be as meaningful, everything to come after, especially like, or maybe not as believable for, people on Earth to like really believe that this was all, real.
Right.
And even like Thor being from another part of the universe, it's like, whatever. But yeah, this is really made the connection for me.
It spread out the galaxy so much that, you're right. Now that first of all, we got a real we got a glimpse of Thanos at the end of the Avengers in the Easter egg, but we got, this was Josh Brolin's first performance as Thanos. We didn't quite know yet like who he was or what he was doing, but we knew he was really bad, and we knew that's where we figured out that Nebula and Gamora now are his daughters. It sets up this larger world so that when later on, when he gets the Infinity Gauntlet, you think of like, it's not just Earth, it's like all these places I've been. Yeah.
And then you also kind of, get the first glimpse of like how the whole Infinity War story is going to come together. I think it starts with, Gamora trying to get this Infinity Stone. It's like, why does she want that so bad?
Right.
And she doesn't want to use it for anything evil.
Yeah, I definitely think, like, in hindsight, you realize, like, she knows how powerful these things are. Which, by the way, one of my favorite Marvel lines ever is when the Power Stone goes off in the Collectors and Rocket just walks out. I was like, why do you still have this thing? Like, I think that's why you're able to believe in a talking raccoon, because he talks and feels like a rational character.
Yeah.
You know?
He's not anything goofy. He's actually pretty serious with himself.
Right.
And probably, the most, I think, the most interesting character, because he has the biggest arc, and he changes so much. If he was kind of like, two-dimensional, I don't think he would be as important or, as, I don't know, as cool to watch.
It's crazy, too, because they get you to a point where you are watching an animated talking raccoon talk about how hurt he is that everyone calls him a freak. Mm-hmm. And like, you feel so bad for this thing, and you're just like, how did this movie get me here? And it's like halfway, we're only halfway through it, and I'm to the point where I'm listening to a experimented on like raccoon saying like, everyone calls me freak and you call me rodent, no one cares, and like, you're like, oh damn, this poor guy.
And maybe it's just because I know Bradley Cooper's voicing it, but kind of having all this turmoil and like this dark side, and dare I say this, raccoon kind of has like a bad boy-esque thing to him, and like,
are you attracted to the raccoon?
There's something hot about Rocket. Let me just say it.
His swagger.
Oh yeah, I'm like, I want to save him.
But it's funny you say Bradley Cooper, because I tend to always forget.
Oh, I can't tell at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you had to tell me that was Bradley Cooper. I'm like, that was not Bradley Cooper. I did not hear anything Bradley Cooper.
Same with Vin Diesel. I always forget that that's Vin Diesel. Like, if I remember it, then I hear it. But if I'm not thinking about it, I don't think about it. If that makes sense.
Actually, that makes sense. It's Vin Diesel to me. I won't say why.
So, 2014, two movies we just spent a lot of time talking about. Probably, maybe, arguably Marvel's best year. Then we get to 2015, which was kind of a mixed bag. I think this is where, when people talk about comic book movie fatigue or some of that kind of like starting to feel a little routine, 2015 might be where it starts a little bit. We have the sequel to the Avengers Age of Ultron, also brought to you by our sponsor. Brought to you by Joss Whedon, just like the first movie. This one didn't quite have the success, not necessarily box office, but people weren't in love with Age of Ultron like they were that first Avengers. And I think part of it is you just like it had sadly become commonplace to us to see these heroes together. So like a little bit of that magic was just inherently gone just by the very nature of doing it again.
Right. That's kind of how they, how the characters, I think, treated the situation, though, in the movie. Right. They were like, okay, we're just together, we're going to do our thing. And, you see the consequences of that, like them not really taking it seriously. So, yeah, I get the critique on it, but I also almost see that as purposeful.
Age of Ultron is one where at first, like, I've grown to actually like this movie a lot. And I think this is one that benefits from hindsight a lot, because you realize after, by the time you get to Infinity War, you realize I only had one movie where all the Avengers were together as a team from start to finish, just like in a normal mission. And that's this movie. Because you realize from this point on, it's never going to be the same again. I think I love James Spader's voice, but I feel like there were times where, we were just talking about with Rocket, how they made Rocket like a real person, so you bought into it. I feel like there was almost too much James Spader in Ultron at times, and I didn't buy into him as like a robotic villain.
Right. I always think of the trailer when I think of this movie, because the trailer almost seemed like Ultron was scarier than he actually was when you see the movie. Maybe because it was too like Spadery. But I didn't feel bad for Ultron. There was nothing really redeemable about him, and I feel like if you made him a little bit more human, and he just, he was the bad part of it. But if you made him like something a little bit more likable, it might have been a better movie because of it.
Yeah, it seems like he comes online and there's this great I think, you just all you see is like kind of like, for lack of a better term, like techno babble on screen. You don't see any characters or anything. You're just seeing like circuits and different things. But you hear Ultron coming online and he's very like confused. Like, where am I? What's happening?
Yeah.
What am I? And I feel like that's the only time that question like comes up. And I feel like if they had kept that essence as part of him.
Right.
And there's a couple times throughout the movie where he's like, you don't understand why I'm doing this. But by the time he says that once or twice, like, it almost seems just like a throwaway line instead of his mission statement.
Yeah, he's made his decisions too quickly about who Ultron was going to be. I feel like you said, I feel like if he stayed in that state where he was almost kind of figuring things out a little bit more, it would be more compelling to see how he grew into what he was. But yeah, it all happened so fast, and it just became like another way for the Avengers to get together and fight something. And I think there's something good about that too, because they've already kind of fought together. They're getting used to each other. You see some more relationships kind of forming. You see Hulk and Black Widow kind of, getting a little flirtatious. I like that one.
It's funny because a lot of people don't like that one.
I love it. I've been rooting for them ever since that point.
Would you ship them over Cap in that?
I mean, I want to see all of it. If it was just one big Avenger orgy, I'd be like, yes, I will watch that movie.
Well, it's Disney-owned, so I don't think that's going to happen. But I think one of the things about this movie, too, is, like, there really is, like, it is almost too complex for its own good. There's a lot that happens, a lot of new characters introduced. And that leads to, at times, really clunky dialogue because they just need you to understand. So there's a part where Vision comes at the end and he's starting to like, he gets his hand on Ultron and he starts wiping out Ultron, kind of his AI from the net. And Ultron literally says, "You shut me out. Do you think I care?" It's like that sounds like a cartoon, but they didn't have any other way of they had to tell you what was happening,
right?
Because they just couldn't show you, and I feel like they do that a handful of times in this movie, where it's like
Scarlet Witch comes to mind.
Yeah.
I keep wanting to say Silver Surfer, but I know that's not him.
Nope. Quicksilver.
Quicksilver. I was kind of disappointed that he had such a short stint because I actually really like that character, and I like that actor too. But yeah, it felt like a little unnatural, like a Scarlet Witch's dialogue too, and I think because they were trying to cram so many, hey, here's this character and she's about to come in and
Right.
try quickly accept her, and it was just kind of like okay, whatever.
All that to say, I do think that this movie does get crapped on a lot, and it is a little messy, but there's still a lot for me that I enjoy about it. I really like the inclusion of Vision. I do like the end, just like their big quote-unquote hero moment, the slow-mo pan around when everyone's beating down.
That is my favorite shot, I think.
It's so great, right? Like, it just gets you so pumped.
Like, yeah, I'm ready for this.
It just does feel a little, like, in hindsight, low stakes. It's like, oh, you had aliens invading from space, and you have a guy who can wipe out half of all life, and then you just had some robots.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, when you look at it on the larger timeline, and I do think it was a little bit of a mistake. A couple months before Age of Ultron came out, they had a big press conference where they announced, like, the next 10 Marvel movies coming, and Infinity War was one of them. So we all knew that bigger things were coming after this.
Right.
So the stakes were kind of already immediately taken away. I also think this movie was a prime example of, we don't know what to do with Thor, so let's just send him off for half the movie to do something weird that never really pans out, To
be honest, I think that's why I liked this movie. This one's pretty high on my rank. It's at 6. And I think it's because it didn't really include Thor, because still at this point I was the least attached to him. I did not need him to be part of anything. The other characters, though, I was really into everything that they were doing, and I wanted to see them progress. So I think that's why I really did enjoy this movie, and I liked how it brought everything forward.
Yeah, I think we get a little bit, just a pinch of Nat's backstory when Scarlet Witch gets in there. That's good. I don't dislike the stuff on the farm with Hawkeye. It gives him a little more dimension.
See, I actually really liked that. I feel like that's something I wouldn't like, but it gave him something. Otherwise, it's like, why are you here?
I get it. I think I like the concept more than I like the execution. I feel like it does kind of like grind the movie to a halt a little bit. But all that to say, like, a lot of good stuff happens there. We get the seeds of Tony and Cap being kind of at moral odds with each other.
I think you see, like, these characters separately, like, how they're connecting with each other. Again, I'm going to go back to, like, you know, Nat and the Hulk. Like, you see a little thing with them and how their story progresses. You see, you know, kind of like a weird setup for, like, Iron Man and Captain America for Civil War. And, like, there's like a nice like friendship there, but you can also see why they have a conflict,
right?
And it was these nice little side stories that I think were brought into Ultron, and that's what I really appreciated about it.
Yeah, so Age of Ultron, middle of the road for me. Like, I do enjoy it, like I said, purely based on the fact that it's really the only like pure start to finish Avengers team movie, where we don't have to put anything together or disassemble anything. Like, they're just there. So we leave May of that year kind of on a, not a high note, but like we've just had this huge, Sokovia destroyed. Like, there's gonna be changes coming from Age of Ultron to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and a lot to think about. But we don't have too much time to think about it, because a couple months later, we get Peyton Reed's Ant-Man. This is... I did a whole episode in the first season of this show. Why I just... This movie is not for me.
I was bummed about this. I mean, not that I was so excited for Ant-Man, because I'm like, really? There's an Ant-Man? And like, why do I want to see this? But, I love Paul Rudd, and... I actually really, the story of it is interesting to me. I just think they did like the opposite that they did with Thor. It's like Thor was like way too serious. This was way too campy. And I don't think they took Ant-Man serious enough. I wish there was like a little bit more of a story with like, what's her face's mother, like some little inkling that she was going to come back into play, like early on. Like, it would have made it, yeah.
What's it, Hank and...
Oh my God.
Why are my... Janet.
No, that's not her name. Oh, Janet's his wife.
Right, that's her mother. No, her mother's Janet. She is Hope.
Hope, that's what her name is, yeah. I wish there was something a little bit more there. It's just like Hope was so... they talk about in the second one, like where... What's his friend's name? Luis, like when Luis does his whole story thing and he talks about Hope, like, my hair's all business. Like, yeah, it was too business. Like, that's another thing. It's like, between Thor's eyebrows and Hope's wig, I was like...
You have some aesthetic problems.
Oh my, it takes me out of it. I'm like, this is ridiculous looking.
Yeah, I think for me, like, the character of Hope, again, I don't want to rehash too much what I said in that episode. You can go check it out if you want to get a long breakdown. I think the character of Hope is problematic for me. I don't quite understand why they made her so flip-flop in this movie. Like, sometimes she's like very much on her dad's side, and then she does things that just makes it
teenager,
yeah, she makes it so much harder. I also think this movie is just very claustrophobic for me. All the training in the house, I feel like I'm trapped in one little area. It just doesn't have the magic feel for me. I was very disappointed when I saw this. It's almost more than Thor Dark World. This is probably my least watched one. I think I've only rewatched it for like our long rewatches for Infinity War and Endgame. But I also feel like I was sold as like, oh, if Winter Soldier is a superhero movie, but it's also like a political thriller, and Guardians of the Galaxy is a Marvel movie, but it's also like a space comedy. They were like, oh, Ant-Man's a superhero movie, but it's also like a heist movie. I'm like, they wimp out on the heist so fast in this movie. The heist is like 4 minutes of like all this setup, and then they're just like, never mind, let's do a big third act superhero thing. So anyone who calls this a heist movie, I'm like, I don't think it is.
The best part of this movie and Ant-Man 2 is his
Is
friend
Luis.
Luis, and it's sad when you need like a sidekick to like carry your movie.
And I kind of think that they knew that and slightly overdid it for Ant-Man and Wasp, but we'll get there. So yeah, if you want to hear like my real in-depth breakdown, I did season 1. Go check it out with Hal Rednick. We got really into Ant-Man, but yeah, it might be the very bottom of my list.
It's pretty close to the bottom.
So that takes us into 2016, and this one, besides the first Avengers movie and later Infinity War, this was probably the one that I was most excited for. We're talking about Captain America: Civil War. This was one, I mean, you could almost call this Avengers 3.
Yeah.
Because it really plays as Avengers movie with an emphasis on Captain America. But this is one of those movies where I see how much they had to do in this movie. All these characters that they had to introduce. All these characters that they had to service that we already knew. All these storylines that had to coalesce. And somehow they did it. I still don't know how this movie exists. It shouldn't work at all. But it does somehow.
It's my second favorite movie in the Marvel universe, and even above Infinity War. And don't get me wrong, loved Infinity War, but there was something about Civil War that really brought it all together for me, and I became just so invested in the whole story and each of the characters that I think this is like one of my favorite movies aside from just superheroes and Marvel. It's just so well done, and I think you obviously do need to understand a lot of the character backgrounds for this, so I'm glad I had seen everything before I finally got to this one. But it's just so good. I love everything about it.
I think Civil War is probably the first Marvel movie where they didn't stop and like try to make this movie so you could enjoy it if you hadn't seen anything to this. This was probably the point of no return, where it's like, if you're not on board now, like, we can't slow down.
Right.
Because as a movie, taken as its own piece with no context, there's a lot about this movie that wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like, you have to know a lot of these things already, or else it's like, imagine if you just watched this without having seen anything else, you'd be like, the characters are terrible in this. Hawkeye, some guy named Hawkeye shows up halfway through and I'm supposed to care. You know what I mean? Like, you really have to know who they are. But I think that's what makes, this is where the MCU, you realize it works more like a great season of television than it does like movies. It's very narrative in that way. But what a great introduction to Spider-Man, which was such a great surprise that they were able to work out a deal with Sony to include Spider-Man into it. A great introduction for Black Panther.
I love that they brought Black Panther into this one.
And it doesn't feel shoehorned in.
Yeah, it was perfect. And I think this movie also was, I already kind of like Captain America for the most part, but I really became attached to him in this one and his whole backstory and where he came from and how he came to be and where he is now, especially with Bucky too. And their story together just became so fascinating to me, and I just wanted to know. It made me want to know more and made me really root for them. I think everyone probably always picks sides between Iron Man and Captain America. Like, sorry, I was on Captain America's side.
It's funny because I think that's what makes this movie so interesting, is that depending on where I am in my life, I've actually flip-flopped. Because sometimes I think, like, Captain America is right, and, like, even if the rules are wrong, sometimes you've got to do what you know is morally right. And then there are other times where I'm like Team Iron Man, where it's like, well, just because you think something's right doesn't make you the moral authority on how things should be. Like, that's what makes this movie so great, is that, like, no one character is entirely wrong.
Yeah, well, let me say this. Like, if I'm thinking rationally, like, Iron Man's totally right. Like, it's, if I was in his position, I would do the same thing. I actually would not do what Captain America is doing. But I'd also say, like, hey, Bucky, maybe just go to jail for a little bit and, like, just work it off. But I mean, again, because of Captain America and Bucky's story and how far they've come together. I mean, they're not of this time. Like, they're the only ones they have left. Like, that's what makes me root for them so much.
Yeah, this movie does something too where it subverts the traditional structure of a superhero movie, where they give you the big third act battle in the middle. They give you the airport sequence in the second act, because the third act is a much smaller, more personal battle, and by that point you've seen Tony in 6-7 movies at this point, and Cap too, that it like hurts when they're not friends anymore.
I mean,
know?
Let's be honest. When we saw the trailer of them like fighting together and like passing the shield back and forth, you were like, "What the F is that? I need to see it."
And it's one of those things where like I forgot about that shot from the trailer, because when Tony comes to help him, I thought, "Oh, okay." The whole movie they've been against each other, but like most of these superhero things, they'll work it out at the end to get the real bad guy. But they don't.
No, that looked serious from the trailer to me. I was like, oh no, this is going down.
Yeah.
Something's wrong.
And when Cap drops that shield, like it's never going to be the same again.
No.
Like this is the beginning of the end, which is like, it's bittersweet, but it helps the movie so much. We also I want to point out real quick, Sebastian Stan is yoked in this movie. He is Buffy Barnes.
Dude. I remember just like, again, maybe me and my aesthetics, but I just remember staring at him like, did they put like extra padding on him? Like, he looks like just a wall.
He's huge.
And then you also see that one shot of like the Black Widow, and he's like holding her, and she's like just bashing his head, and he's not flinching. You're just like, whoa.
Yeah, it's so weird, because then he goes in Infinity War 2 years later, he's back to normal. So
I was reading a trivia thing on that one, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, and I guess he accidentally like got too big for Civil War, and they had to remake his arm because he didn't fit in his old one anymore.
Ginormous.
Yeah, and I was like, that can't be real.
Yeah.
But I guess it was.
If you haven't noticed, go back and watch Civil War and just do like a side-by-side with like Winter Soldier or Infinity War, and you'll be like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like Barry Bonds big.
But I guess like you see him in Infinity War, like you also have to keep in mind, like it kind of makes sense. It's like, okay, he's not really like fighting.
Right, he's
like,
been frozen
he's
for
been
a
like
while.
chilling,
Yeah.
like in a in a tent or whatever in Wakanda. Like he's just keeping it really relaxed.
Just in Civil War, it looks like he could take on the other side by himself.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's
very
a big
scary.
Guy. But Civil War was great. It definitely continued the tradition of a Captain America movie, completely changing the status quo of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Because after Captain America Winter Soldier, no one was the good guy anymore. We had no idea who to trust, because Hydra had their claws and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Now leaving this, our heroes, and half of them are in different areas than the others and not speaking to each other. That took us to November. Another hero who was not involved in Civil War, he had his own thing going on, Doctor Strange. And this is one that a lot of people either forget about or they're like, it was fine. I put this pretty high because this one to me is so imaginative that every time I watch it, I'm just like, how did somebody think of all of this? Like, how did you storyboard this? How did you do this?
Yeah. I remember this is one that I was pretty hesitant to go see, and I was like, do I want to see this? But you convinced me. And the first time I saw it, I was like, yeah, it's all right. I could do without it. But the more and more I watch it, the more it grows on me, and the more interesting Doctor Strange's character becomes. Not necessarily like how he came to be Doctor Strange, but once he becomes Doctor Strange, I'm really into it.
I think this movie still suffers from Marvel's kind of lackluster villains. No one really remembers Mads Mikkelsen. I don't even remember what Mads Mikkelsen's character's name is in this. It's like Caecilius or something.
Yeah, Caecilius.
I do like, too, this movie had some visuals that, like, I know people don't talk about it in the same way, but it's like stuff that I had never seen before. And at this point, by 2016, it was hard to show me a special effects sequence that I hadn't been like, yeah, I've seen this a million times. To do a whole fight in while everything around you is going in reverse.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool, and I'd never seen that before.
It was very like Inception to me.
It was very like Matrix Inception. And then again, like I loved that they once again, twice this year in that year, that they subverted the third act trope of having like the big fight be the end. And instead it's this like kind of mind game playoff between him and Dormammu.
Yeah.
I love that kind of like reversal and I think that's why I said like 2015 we started to feel like, okay, I know how these movies go, and and then when Ant-Man came around and kind of once again did the typical first act, second act, third act origin, I was like, ugh. So to see a new origin with a new character, and now it's not like here's your mask and here's your cape and he wears a cape, but you get what I mean. Like this was more just like almost like a weird like ninja movie, but instead of ninja, it was magic.
Yeah. I like that aspect, and I didn't actually think about that until you just said it, but I think that does make it pretty cool.
Yeah, it just makes it feel different.
Mm-hmm. Like I forget that it's like wizardry, and it's, just like mastering any sort of martial arts in a way, I guess.
Right, and I love the, one of my favorite like fights is where he's like kind of dead and the other guy's kind of dead, and like their ghosts are fighting each other. Yeah. He's like, shock me. I also love one of my favorite Marvel scenes, and it's so well acted, is when Tilda Swinton, the Ancient One, is just about to die, and she goes out on that balcony, and she just delivers probably one of the best lines in Marvel, where she's like, you still don't get it. It's not about you.
Yeah.
Which is like something that I feel like a lot of these heroes struggle with. And for Steven to finally hear that. And I love too, like, I knew from the comics that Mordo, Baron Mordo was going to be the villain. But I think if you watch this movie, it doesn't
seem that way.
Yeah, it doesn't
you
feel
had to
like
tell me for me, and
right.
I wouldn't have gotten it otherwise.
It doesn't feel like they're setting it up like so hardcore, like, oh, he's going to be the villain in the second one. Like, you get it. He's been trained by this person who said, don't do this thing. That's not who we are. Only to find out that's what she's been doing. Like, I'd be kind of upset too,
Yeah, that's what I kind of liked about her, though, and her character. It was, when I found that out, it didn't bother me that she was dabbling in the dark arts, because if you're not like a master of it all, then you're not really the master. So for her to understand it and be using it, I think it was actually smart of her not to let anyone else learn it, because you have to be careful who actually does understand it. And I think that was a little bit childish of him, of Mordo, to say like, how come you didn't share it with me? How come you're saying it's because you don't need to know it?
Right.
And I think that's what's going to make him a good villain if he comes around again, because he just doesn't understand it enough to really he won't have like great enough power to defeat anyone because of it.
Right. I mean, they always say like, the best screenwriters, the best cooks or whatever. It's like you have to know the rules in order to be able to break them.
Right.
So then we get from Doctor Strange, which, I think is a great move into like the more mystical parts of the MCU. So then we move back in time chronologically. So we're moving forward in our time now. It's May of 2017. But we're going back to just days after the end of Guardians of the Galaxy for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which picks up right after. This is one where a lot of people walked away like, it was good, but not as good as the first one.
Seriously?
I'm with you, though. I think this
is my number one. Like, perfect movie. Okay?
You can't see it, but she has her hands on her hips right now. She's very authoritative.
Like, I don't understand how anyone could not like this movie.
I think that this movie takes what's good about the first movie and the fun, but it adds a layer of maturity and emotion that the first one didn't have, that just makes it so rich. I'm with you. I think this one's better than the first one for different reasons.
Yeah, there's something about the way Guardians went about, I guess, the origin of all the characters too, where they kind of just like gave you a taste in Guardians 1, and then they they went back a little bit further, especially for like Quill and his dad in this one. And I liked it that way. I thought it made sense to just like kind of be a little bit more focused in this one, because you already kind of, knew them for the most part. But it made the like getting to know each of them more acceptable. And it didn't need to like continue. It's like, okay, like I actually liked that they started and ended with like, hey, here's who Quill is, here's where he came from, and okay, now you know it, now we can move on.
Right.
I just think they did it really well. And this is the character arc for Rocket that I loved so much too, where it's like this, dark, this little bad boy raccoon, I guess.
as most great movies have, the archetype of the bad boy raccoon.
I mean, I don't know how else to to archetype him, I guess, but he has a major growth and he figures out who he is, especially in this group too, where I think that's what bothered him the most before is he was kind of just made. He never really was attached to any sort of family or anything. And they all kind of realized, like, oh yeah, this really is my family and I serve a purpose in this group. So that was really nice to see for me. And I mean, come on, Baby Groot. Again, how could you not love this movie just for Baby Groot?
Baby Groot is fantastic. I agree with you. I think every character gets to take a little step forward. There's some criticism around Drax that he's a little too laughy and a little too like but I think when you have such a heavy movie, it's okay if one of the characters, like we already got a lot of emotional baggage from Drax in the first one, like,
right.
And there's a beautiful moment with him and Mantis where she feels his pain.
Emotion, yeah.
But I think ultimately, like, I love that Nebula and Gamora kind of we come back around to that and have this is the beginning for me where Nebula starts to become a really interesting character, because that first movie, I think Karen Gillan played it very like almost hammy, like, I'm bad,
There's something about her voice too where I remember asking him, like, did they mod her voice to sound more robot-y? And you're like, no, that's her voice. I'm like, oh, that's crazy, that's her voice. And I think that's what weirdly takes away from like her character in the first one, but adds to it.
Yeah, I think it's like ever so slightly like digitally echoed or something, but they let her be a little bit more human in this in the second one. And I love that moment where you find out that like you kind of find out why she has such resentment for Gamora. But I love one of my favorite moments is when she finally saves Gamora in the big battle, and Gamora just looks at her and she's like, get over it. like Nebula starts to become a character that you're like interested in, so that by the time that she's in peril in Infinity War, you understand and you feel for it. But that's hard to do. It's hard to give your villains, especially from the first movie, dimension.
This is probably not the right term to use, but like I think with this movie too, and with Guardians franchise in general, like they're probably the most real people. Like people's the wrong term, maybe. Right. But they're the most real of all the other Marvel characters, and to see like, two sisters fighting. It's like, oh, here's what it looks like when two very powerful, like part robotic sisters fight each other. Right. They almost kill each other. Oh, totally normal, and get over it. Like they're just like a casual fight in a weird way. Yeah,
I love it. I love when Gamora's being shot at from this plane. She's like, are you kidding me? Just like more annoyed. I think it's funny. I think Michael Rooker turns it up as Yondu and somehow makes you care about that character.
Fell in love with him in this one. And I love how they did that. I think it was so cool to see, and kind of sad to see Quill like suddenly make the connection of like, oh yeah, even though you were kind of a hard ass on me and, I guess I didn't really think about it, but you taught me everything I knew. Right. And I think in other ways, like a connection like that, be like, you were my pops, like probably would have been cheesy, but I accepted it. I like that twist.
You buy it by that point because we've now given all these characters room, like you said, to be quote unquote real people. Yeah. The other thing that I really love about Guardians 2, which by this point is very tough to pull, to get it to be this way, but it's like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, doesn't try to be like, by the way, here's some Infinity Stones that's going to come into play. It's like, nope, this is just like, this story lives for this moment, for these characters, so that indirectly it makes you feel more connected to them, so you are more upset when things happen to them later, but instead of like having to be plotty about it. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah. The thing that, I guess, not really plotty, but that kind of helped me with this one, in addition to already loving it. But I think you had told me something I didn't know before about this one, where all the characters, like Sylvester Stallone's character and all those other ones you're saying about Yondu, like they were supposed to be like the previous Guardians.
They're in the comics, they are the OG Guardians of the Galaxy.
I thought that was so cool that there was that, like, I mean, they didn't really say that in the in the movie, but you just giving me that little tidbit was so cool to me, because there's like this passing of the torch, especially between like Yondu and Rocket.
Right.
And it was just like I guess an Easter egg, if you want to call it that, like, to be able to include that was really fun.
And probably the most emotional ending.
Cried my eyes out.
How they could do a close-up of a CGI talking raccoon with a single tear, and it breaks your heart.
Ugh.
How, like, it's incredible. I don't have words.
I think when that movie came out, and we were watching it at home, after I'd been in the theater for so long, I was watching it at home for the first time, and I think I was just sitting on the couch just like crying so hard. You come in, you're like, are you still crying? Like, you've seen this like twice already.
It's so funny too, because like, if we have this movie on, even if you're doing something and you literally only catch the last 30 seconds, you immediately start crying.
Oh, yeah.
You could like walk in just at that part and start crying.
Oh, yeah. No, it totally gets me. And I think they put the perfect song to it also. It just, I think that's what makes that movie so perfect for me, is I think that ending was just beautiful. I'm sorry I'm being so cheesy about it, but it was lovely.
And I'm so happy that they were able to work it out and get James Gunn back to finish off his trilogy. It wouldn't have been the same if someone else had come in.
Oh, yeah, you won't.
So we got 3 this year, 2017, the most of any other Marvel year. This one is kind of an interesting one, because it's half Sony, half MCU. Talking about Spider-Man Homecoming. This came out later in July. This was a movie that a lot of people never thought would actually happen. Sony had the rights to Spider-Man. Then there was all those Sony email hacks and leaks, and we saw that a deal was trying to be worked out where, Sony and Marvel could work together putting the movie out, and Sony would keep all the movie profits. I believe that's the split. It's like Sony keeps the movie profits and Marvel, Disney gets all like the merchandising and all that stuff. So it kind of behooves Sony in the sense that, okay, yeah, put Spider-Man in all your Avengers movies, even if we don't make money off that, because people are going to love this version and want to see him in his own movie, which we will make. So Spider-Man Homecoming is one, I really like it. I don't love it, but I like it a lot.
I was not necessarily like super excited to see Spider-Man in Civil War, but he was a nice addition, and I like that he was included. I was not looking forward to the regular Spider-Man, mostly because like this Spider-Man character, well, number one, like, I'm sorry, Tobey Maguire is Spider-Man to me, and it's hard to accept a new one, but I don't know, this Spider-Man character does not hold a movie by himself very well, and I think the inclusion of Tony Stark in this one helped it, and I actually was more interested in the villain for this movie than anything. I couldn't really get into this one. This one's pretty low on my list as well.
I think for this one, like, I enjoy this one. For me is like popcorn or potato chips. Like, I enjoy it while I'm eating it, but it doesn't get me full. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense. Like, I definitely think the movie kicks it up a notch, like 100 notches, as soon as Peter shows up and realizes that Michael Keaton is her dad.
Yeah, that was great.
That's one of the best like reveals, because even I was like, I did not see that coming. Yeah, and it's pretty hard these days to like not have me see where it's going. I think I really like all the Peter Parker stuff. The Spider-Man stuff for me is just like, all right, you know?
I think, actually, I feel the opposite, where the Spider-Man stuff is cool, but the Peter Parker stuff is so boring to me, and maybe it's because I also think of Peter Parker as, like, he's in love with Mary Jane. Where the F is Mary Jane?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, like, I think there's a concentrated effort to, like, you know, every Peter Parker is like a high school kid, and every Peter Parker we've seen so far is like 35.
Yeah.
So I think they're really trying to like go back to the roots of Spider-Man, and like Mary Jane wasn't there day one of Spider-Man.
I think I'm still missing like a motivation from him. And maybe I think of Mary Jane as that motivation, especially like from previous movies, where in this one it's like he's just like a kid who like wants to fight. Okay, great, whatever. He's still like not mature enough to really handle things on his own. Enter Tony Stark, and he still needs a lot of help. So I guess if they pushed further on like him learning or having someone teach him, maybe it would have been more interesting to me. But otherwise, I don't see a reason for him to do what he does.
It's definitely like, it's one of those things where like this is where you start to realize like there are so many heroes, especially in New York. Yeah, it's like they really tried to get the friendly neighborhood aspect of it. Like that's his kind of purpose. But like I said, I like this movie. I don't dislike it, but it's also just like, all right, like I could have that one on the background while I clean. I'm not going to stop and watch it. I do think though that there are some really great Spider-Man moments. I think when he is trapped under all the rubble and he can't get up and he starts like crying like someone help me, like I feel like Tom Holland is very good at bringing like the very real human kid element, like what would a kid do in that situation, and just being like panicking like someone help me and then realizing he has to do it himself. That's a really great scene. It's then followed by a third act where I've seen this movie probably 4 or 5 times. I get it. The jet has mirrors on it, so it looks invisible. But for me, it's very hard for me to follow the action in that third act. I'm like, what is happening? Where am I? So by that point, the movie loses me a little bit. I think this movie just kind of... Its biggest problem, well, not even problem, but I think this movie that none of the others had to worry about is that it has really big shoes to fill, like you said, with the Tobey Maguire movies. I think if Spider-Man 2 wasn't like one of the greatest comic book movies ever made, my expectations of what a Spider-Man movie should be wouldn't be so high. And that's not to say I don't like this movie. I do like this movie a lot. It's just not like upper tier of the Marvel movies for me.
This movie also doesn't bridge anything for the whole saga, I guess, too. Like it doesn't do anything to carry the story forward. That's why I was kind of disappointed that they didn't do more of like the Tony Peter Parker relationship, because you get such a great payoff for it in Infinity War that I think it would mean more in this movie. Otherwise, this movie has no stakes. I
feel like a lot of people actually enjoy the aspect of not every Marvel movie, like especially we just said we like Guardians 2 because it doesn't feel like it has to be just an appendage to this larger saga. It can be its own thing, and I think some people really like that about Spider-Man. I agree with you. Like I was a little worried that it was just going to become the Tony Stark movie, because they were really pushing the Iron Man in the marketing, like to the point where there's shots in the trailer of Iron Man that do not end up in the film, just because they wanted you to go see another Iron Man movie. But knowing now how big a part of Tony's journey later in these movies is going to be, through Peter, maybe a little bit more. But
I mean, okay, so to your point about Guardians 2 and kind of just having it be its own thing, that's fine, but you also had so much going on that it carried it by itself. Again, I just don't think that Peter Parker by himself carries this movie. He has nothing to do besides fight his pseudo-girlfriend's father.
I think it's more like, and this has always been the thing with Spider-Man, it's more like Thor doesn't have to worry about fighting crime and also studying for a midterm, like He does, Iron Man doesn't have to worry about, illegal arms and also trying to get a girl to go out with him for the prom. So there's definitely it's more of a teen movie with a little bit of superhero mixed in than it is, another Marvel adventure. And that's kind of the cool thing about Spider-Man. I love the character of Spider-Man. That's probably in my top 5 favorite superheroes ever. This one's just, it's good. Yeah. I like it. I don't love it. I'll never love it.
Yeah, Spider-Man always had the best villains in my opinion. Yeah. Second to Batman, of course. But yeah, I think, sorry to keep bringing back the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, but there was also an element of besides Mary Jane having Harry, in those
earlier, the James Franco.
Yeah, the James Franco, having that character kind of helped keep the drama going too, and he doesn't really have anything like that.
Not yet. We'll see where we go with Spider-Man Far From Home, which, for the record, has my favorite Spider-Man villain, Mysterio, complete with his big dumb fishbowl head.
I will give it a chance.
I mean, at this point, aren't you just kind of in for a Marvel movie, kind of no matter what?
Oh yeah, I'm gonna see every single one, but Spider-Man is just doesn't get me going.
It's just not for you.
Not yet.
So then we went to our third Marvel movie of 2017, which was Thor Ragnarok. Now, this was, from the get-go, almost a complete, I almost want to call it a reboot of Thor. It feels tonally different than anything coming before it. They keep some of the imagery, but that's about it.
Yeah. I like I said before, Thor was the least interesting character to me this whole time. And once I saw Thor Ragnarok, I did a 180. I was like, freaking love Thor now. Loved that they included Hulk because, right. Hulk gets me going. So this was probably one of the more perfect Marvel movies for me. I'm so glad that they included it and made it.
I definitely think Thor Ragnarok is probably, for me, one of the most rewatchable.
Oh, yeah.
You can just throw this on. It's more of a comedy than it is anything else.
Yeah, but I think that's what made it Thor better. Because, it's such silly stuff,
right.
What Thor is about. So you kind of have to make it silly. And I think that's what this character needed the entire time. And I think I was reading or listening to something about Chris Hemsworth suddenly being excited to do this role again because he actually liked how Thor Ragnarok turned out.
Yeah, I think Chris Hemsworth shines when he gets to be funny.
Oh yeah, because
I think he's the funniest part of that Ghostbusters.
Oh, he acts like such a weirdo, and it's
right.
hilarious.
And I think he enjoys that aspect of it, and also too you can tell everyone's having a good time. But that's why I was saying earlier, think back to when we were talking about Incredible Hulk, that Ed Norton version versus Mark Ruffalo in Ragnarok, 2 different people completely.
Yeah.
But it's not unearned. It's just that's where we've gotten to.
Yeah. Even though I had a new love for Thor in this one, this was a big Hulk movie for me. And
right.
This was my favorite thing to watch about it, is just to see how Mark Ruffalo is going back and forth in his turmoil to, realizing, holy crap, I've been the Hulk for this long.
For years,
yeah. And, just understanding where he's been this whole time since Ultron 2 was, it was a gratifying inclusion to the story.
It was silly, but it didn't feel too silly,
right?
Which is, interestingly enough, I saw this movie and I walked out, I was like, I liked it, but man, they went too silly. That's how I felt at the time.
Yeah.
And I think this movie grew on me a lot to now where it's one of my favorites. But this definitely is they do the X-Men Days of Future Past thing where it's we're just gonna, even if we have to actually say it on screen, we're getting rid of those first 2 movies.
Right.
And there's a little part of me that was okay, but for the few of us that did some of those, his friends, the Warrior 3, they literally get one line of dialogue and then they are just capped.
Yeah.
They're out of it. And even just little things like Hela going around Odin's trophy chamber from the first movie, we're oh, look at that, that's cool from the comics. And she just walks around, she's fake, fake,
Yeah.
fake. Like, I get it. That was also there so that they could write out why the Infinity Gauntlet was in Odin's chamber in the first Thor movie. But it also, too, I feel like is very much a commentary on those movies. Like, don't worry about those other Thor movies. We're past it.
I completely agree that they did. I'm so glad they did.
In
that.
hindsight,
Yeah.
I've come around to it. But it's also funny because you think about this movie as a straight up comedy. And it's probably, for my money, the funniest of any Marvel movie. But it's also a very interesting commentary on, like, colonialism.
Right.
And how it's like, you know, I love that Hela's just like, you're so proud of everything you have, but you try to deny how you got it, you know?
I think that's what balances it for me. I don't know if I see this as like a straight comedy because I do enjoy a good family drama. Mm-hmm. And with Hela coming about and, you know, like Thor and Loki kind of like figuring out that connection and like that's a big trip to realize you have a sister that you never knew about.
Right.
And I really did love that scene where they said goodbye to Odin and she came about. Like that also was like, that was a freaky moment for me.
Yeah.
And she was a great villain to have. And I liked how even Loki kind of came around too, you saw like more of a brotherly love. And then like obviously like Loki's the god of mischief, so of course he's gonna never be like completely straight, but he did do like a little bit of helping out, and then also he was himself. So
yeah, the great thing about that too is they finally let Thor not be a dumbass.
Right.
And Thor's like, I'm not stupid.
Yeah.
I knew you were gonna turn on me the second I turned my back on you.
Right.
Like I've already. And that I love that too when Loki comes to help at the end. It's not so much like he pulls like almost like a George Costanza, like I'm here to rescue you. It's like, you know, but it's great. I love how they end that movie on that relationship because you finally feel like, and they started to get to this at Thor the Dark World, this brotherly bond, but then they kind of had to drop it a little bit.
Right.
But now you really feel like I don't 100% trust Loki. But I trust him if Thor trusts him enough.
Right.
And when he throws that thing at the end and Loki's actually there and catches it, like that's a great moment.
Well, it's kind of a, you know, everyone has that one family member that's just like, ugh. And I feel like Loki is him.
Right.
And so like Thor just, you know, he accepts him for what he is. Like, I love him because he's my brother. That doesn't mean I like everything about him, but he's there. I'll tolerate him and I'll love him.
And Loki reluctantly, but he does show up at the end. Everyone's standing by the king. You know, Thor's the king now, sitting in his chair, and Loki walks up by his side, you know? And I think, like, that's great closure for that character. Mm-hmm. So that's why, like, it didn't hurt. Well, I mean, it hurt, but it didn't bother me as much that, like, he wasn't in Infinity War very much, because it's like, I feel like we came, you know, all the way around with Loki in Ragnarok. I love the supporting characters. I think Valkyrie
is great.
It's tough because I feel like sometimes a lot of these movies that have like empowering badass women are still written by men, and they feel like there's one way to write a badass character. And I'm glad that they made her not like, here's the space version of Black Widow.
Right.
You know, she's got her own issues, you know, watching her. Do they imply it's like a lover? But, you know, her Valkyrie sister dying for her, you know?
No, I think, like, she, from what I understand, and maybe I misinterpreted it, but the Valkyrie, like, they were all kind of, like, very tightly bonded.
Right.
And just having all of them, I think, die. I'm assuming all of them died except for her. Like, I think that was probably a really big deal for her because it's something she dedicated her life to. So now that she doesn't have that, and she's stuck in this other world, like, you know, she's like, she drinks heavily, and she still doesn't really affect her that much, and she's just kind of trying to do whatever she can to get by. And in a weird way, it's kind of like, it's very like Hulkish too, because like Hulk, you know, has finally like just accepted, like, this is my life, so like I guess I'll just deal with it the way I can, and she's doing the same thing, but you know, she's finding like a different purpose now somehow in this movie. Yeah,
I love that, you know, he's like, you're depressed and drinking and we can go stop, and she's like, I'm not going to stop drinking.
Yeah.
Like, that's just who I am. He's like, all right.
I think like she's one of my favorite female superhero characters.
Yeah, I hope I think she survived the snap because they put out all these posters for Endgame, and if your poster was in color, you were alive, and if your poster was in black and white,
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
You're snapped. And they put out a poster of her, and it was in color. So
yeah,
I would love to see her more. If they do end up doing a Thor 4, I hope she's a part of it, because I really like that character. And we have to talk. Jeff Goldblum is just incredible.
He's good in everything he does. I mean, come on. But he's very Jeff Goldblum in this, which is, I think, perfect for this character.
I'm upset. Very upset.
And I was just so distracted by his makeup. I loved it so much. I was like, I'm gonna do that look, I think.
It's a bummer that Benicio del Toro's character seemingly is killed off, because they're brothers. As you know, you go to the Guardians of the Galaxy ride at Disneyland, you can see a painting of them sitting together.
They're brothers?
Yeah.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, exactly. And I hope, look, we're getting all these Marvel things on like Disney Plus. I hope that we revisit like wouldn't you watch a show of the Collector and the Grandmaster?
I would. I totally would.
Weird Space Brothers.
I would want it to be like a reality show of them.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
Right?
Instead of like a narrative, just have it be like the real world with them.
The real crazies of the universe, yeah. The Real Housewives.
So yeah, I guess you don't even realize when you're watching this, but that Thor Ragnarok leaves you right where it's going to pick up for Infinity War. But we had one movie to go before we got to Infinity War in February. Now we're in 2018. We got Black Panther. This was a cultural milestone. Mm-hmm. Like, to say that this was a very successful movie is 100% underplaying it. This was a phenomenon, like to the point where it's domestically has made more in the United States than Infinity War did.
Oh, wow.
Which is insane. And I think this is where, Marvel realized that, for so long it was like, if you put, people of color or women as your protagonists, people aren't going to go see it. And it's like, no, that is 100% wrong.
Right.
Representation matters, and the proof's in the pudding, because Black Panther not only made a ton of money, I think it's a really fun, good movie.
Oh, yeah. And you know what's funny about this one? Not that I don't like the Black Panther character, but I liked him so much when he came about in Civil War. He wasn't my favorite character of his own movie, though. I loved all the other characters in this movie. I think they were so amazing.
That's, you're not the first person to say that Black Panther is not the most interesting person in Black Panther. I do think I love Okoye. Denai Guerrera. I think she's incredible. And I also am a big fan of Shuri. I love that, I love that she's just so spunky and sassy, but she's also smarter than anyone in the MCU.
Yeah.
She's smarter than Tony, smarter than Bruce. I love in Infinity War, which is like, why didn't you just do blah, blah, blah? He's like,
isn't she just like a teenager too? Like
she's supposed to be, maybe like 18 or early 20s.
Something like that.
She's young.
I love it.
I also think this really, when you talk about kind of lame villains in the MCU, this is definitely the 100% opposite, because I think Killmonger actually is the star of this movie.
I completely agree. He was fantastic. And Michael B. Jordan was I was really sad to see that he died at the end.
Right.
Because I think he was just so cool. Like, I could see a version of this, obviously I don't read the comics, so I don't know how it turns out, but I could see a version of this where he didn't die at the end, and he almost became like a weird Loki in a way, where he changed and was able to fight with them in Infinity War.
He would have been an amazing
asset. I know, yeah. Like, I could see this character totally being a great part of the Avengers in some way, but I get why he didn't last too.
I mean, he does go out on such a powerful note. Like, I'm not gonna be, just in chains.
He just has Wakandan crazy prison. Integrity. So
he does, and like the thing is too, like I love that we get into a little bit more. We've seen a lot of science, we've seen a lot of magic, but we haven't seen like the spirituality of the MCU. Mm-hmm. And I love like the ancestral plane scenes. Like, first, they're just gorgeous to look at, but I love that like T'Challa goes and he sees his father and his ancestors in this almost like Lion King, like beautiful African landscape. And then Eric goes, and it's that that worn down, apartment in Oakland, and it's just like such a sad. And he I love what a brilliant choice by director Ryan Coogler to it goes back and forth between it being Michael B. Jordan and him as a little kid talking to his dad, and it's just like, you feel so bad for him because he got screwed. He got screwed out of a dad. He got screwed out of a life in this Wakandan paradise. He's got a chip on his shoulder, and like Loki in the first Thor, you understand why.
Right. Yeah. He was just. It was the most fascinating part for me. And then I also loved, I always forget his name, the tribe that doesn't really want to be M'Baku. He was great.
Winston Duke,
yeah. Oh, I love him. He was such a cool part of it. And I liked how he came about in the end to help him because, again, it's like it wasn't like a two-dimensional character where it's like he just wanted to fight, Black Panther just because he wanted to try and fight their whole system that they made. But he ends up really caring in the end, and I think that's what made him so great and so redeemable.
Yeah, and he becomes like a cool ally to T'Challa later on in Infinity War, bringing the Jabari tribe. But when the Jabari first come out at that first coronation ceremony, it's frightening. Yeah, you just hear the chants and the way Ryan Coogler shoots it with just these creepy masks coming out of this dark kind of crevice in this cave, And like you said, you love the family drama. There's tons of family drama. I love, the Forrest Whitaker character. Was like the spy, and he lives with this guilt. And there's just a lot to like about Black Panther. Definitely one of those ones where I feel like it's not there are really cool action sequences. But I feel like this one is more emotionally driven than action driven for me, at least.
Yeah, agreed. And I liked it. I liked that part about it. It was done really well. And I also, kind of bringing in the cultural aspect with all the technology. I loved how they built what Wakanda looked like, and just all those little touches too. And can we talk about the soundtrack for a second?
Oh, the soundtrack is amazing.
Unbelievable.
Right. Not just in look, I love all the Kendrick Lamar and the song that plays over the credits is amazing, but also too just the score with the African drums. Yeah. it's just, it feels different than everything else in the MCU, and when you're 18, 19, 20 movies in, it's hard to feel original and fresh. And then this one came around. So it's tough because I had this one kind of middle of my rankings, and maybe I ranked it too low. But I definitely really, really love this movie. And I love that this movie, that there are a lot of people that connected to this. And it means a lot that Black Panther became this cultural phenomenon. And again, like I said, it's so crazy that Infinity War would come out 2 months later, and Black Panther, we went and we saw Black Panther in theater because when we did our rewatch, that was the last one we had to see. It was the week before Infinity War came out, and it was almost sold out months later. So Black Panther, that also had the end credit scene with a less beefy Bucky, the White Wolf.
Bucky hadn't gone to the gym in a while.
Right. He's definitely been just at a spa resort in Wakanda for a couple years. But that leads us in to 2018's Infinity War. Probably the most hyped I've been for a movie since that first Avengers movie. To the point where it was days before I was starting to have dreams about it. I just and I remember you had a work thing and you couldn't go until 11. I was like, I don't care. We will be out until 2 a.m. to see this movie. I'm not missing it opening night. And I'm glad we went because
every minute was worth it.
Every minute was worth it. And that ending with the snap, it was that's something that you don't want someone to tell you about. You need to see it, and the gasp in the audience, Well,
I was just what did I just watch? It was such an emotional toll on me in the moment, and I think I just had to sit in my seat. Both of us were just sitting in the seat, I feel so vulnerable right now.
It's tough. It's not unheard of. It's definitely happened before, but it's definitely to the scale to have your heroes lose in a major summer blockbuster. And then, you're waiting for that mid-credit scene, and it doesn't come. There's no fancy graphics and everything. It's just white text on a black background with actors' names. And then you get the Avengers logo, and it dusts away, and you're like, what?
Yeah, no, you're like, what just happened to me?
I think this is definitely, again, we talked about this with Civil War, but this is a movie that on its own, had you never seen anything else, it's probably like structurally, narratively not a good technical movie, but as a season finale of a show, it's
fantastic.
Like top notch.
Yeah.
Like everything, I can't think of anything in that movie that I'm just like, eh.
Well, think about how difficult it is to bring so many major players together into a movie and coherently. They did a really fantastic job really tying everything up and making it make sense.
Yeah, and I think Josh Brolin did an amazing job. There are parts of that movie where Thanos looks like photorealistic.
Yeah.
Like
compared to like the early renderings of him.
Oh yeah, go back and look at like the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, or even Age of Ultron's post-credit scene, where he looks like a California raisin.
The ball sack chin got better over time.
But then they call it out in the movie, which is great. But I definitely think Thanos, if Thanos hadn't worked, like just didn't look good or something, like, or that performance wasn't there, this movie doesn't work.
Oh yeah.
Like if Josh Brolin doesn't work as Thanos, the whole movie is just shot. It doesn't work.
It's so funny. I didn't really think about that the whole time, but I think that's a good thing, is that the performance was so seamless that it didn't stand out to me in any way.
Yeah. Look, if you're thinking about watching, it's funny too, because like one of the big criticisms of like Incredible Hulk was like, I'm just watching Hulk and, Tim Roth as the Abomination. Just like two video game CGI characters hit each other. This is boring. But then at the beginning of Infinity War, when you see Thanos and Hulk, two CGI characters fighting, you're like, oh, damn! Like he gets him hard. And that's all we get of Hulk in Infinity War, which I was surprised by. This was the first time that I've ever seen, not that it was cut from a movie, but they deliberately made fake scenes in the trailers.
Yeah.
To fool
Oh,
you.
yeah. I was really disappointed at first. I was like, wait, what happened? But I liked it that they did that, because otherwise, like, what else does Hulk have to do? He literally just changes and fights. But, because he's been having so much turmoil, with himself, and like he's been the Hulk for so long, and now he can't even turn into the Hulk. This was really cool to do.
Yeah, everything about Infinity War. It's one of the it's like 2.5 to almost 2:40, and yet it feels like it goes by
really fast.
I've seen this movie so many times, and each time I'm like, when am I going to get sick of this? And I never do. Like there's an inherent sense of dread from the moment it starts. Like it just feels different. Like it doesn't feel like, all right, it's going to be like Age of Ultron, where like something bad happens, then our heroes have to come together. Like, from the first second of this movie, like, this is going to be bad.
Yeah,
like,
it gets right into it with
like, this is not going to be good
ship,
for the
right?
heroes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Ebony Maw is just super creepy. I think Gamora, like, this was probably my favorite kind of, like, she really got to shine in this,
It was really great. And I you know what? I rarely like child actors, but the little girl who played...
Oh, she was great.
Oh, she was perfect.
Yeah.
She really, like, made me feel for what was happening. And, I liked how they did that.
Yeah, it was so funny because I remember, too, a lot of the conversations going into this movie was like, all right, who's going to die? Is it going to be Cap? Is it going to be Tony Stark? And then no one said, like... Oh, like everybody.
Yeah.
And it's funny now in hindsight, there was an interview, I think, on one of the late night shows where I think Ruffalo had said, they're like, so can you tell us who dies? He's like, everybody. And the audience laughs. And I can't remember what other actor. It might have been like Chris Evans or Benedict Cumberbatch, but he gives them a look like, dude, what are you doing? Or maybe it was Don Cheadle. But either way, it's like, but everyone just kind of laughed. It's like, yeah, everybody dies. I'm like, ha. And then you watch the movie, you're like, oh, we were wrong. Like, half the people die.
I mean, yeah, it has to be half, right? Because that's the whole point of the snap.
I just think, like, people criticize, like, it doesn't mean anything because they're coming back. It's like, but they don't. They don't know that they're coming back. And in that moment, like, it feels real to them, and that's why it works.
But also, it's like, do you really want that to be the end of it? Of course you don't want, like, yeah, they're going to come back, But if you thought that they really weren't, would you really be that interested? Like, shut up.
Right. It's like, yeah, if you knew this was going to happen, like, do you want Black Panther to be gone after his mega successful first movie?
Just let the story happen.
Yeah, and I think too, it's like I said, like, we love Steve and Tony and Bruce and all them so much that even if we know logically, like, yes, Doctor Strange has a sequel coming, so Benedict Cumberbatch will be back, but Tony Stark and Steve Rogers don't know that, like, Peter Parker's going to be back. And, like, to watch our quote-unquote friends just, like, their life in shambles and turmoil, like, that's what I think is going to be, like, interesting about Endgame. Is like, we've now been put at our most desperate worst-case scenario, and Thanos won. And I think that's, like, very ballsy, great movie making.
Yeah. The thing that stood out for me the most, not the most, but one big thing that stood out for me was Doctor Strange's character. I think this is what made me like his character more. Not necessarily be from his own movie, but from this. And I remember, like, going back to watch Doctor Strange, and I was like, new appreciation for it.
Yeah, Doctor Strange is definitely my MVP of this movie. It looks like he really is now the Sorcerer Supreme. Like, he feels confident.
He's in his element.
Right.
Yeah.
It feels like he knows more than everyone else at this point. Like, he probably knows how this is all going to end, I
like that there were different characters interacting with each other, too. Like, you mix Thor in with the Guardians, you mix Iron Man with Doctor Strange, and, you get
Bucky and Rocket.
Yeah. Oh, God. That was my favorite.
Oh, I'll get that arm.
Loved it so much.
Yeah, look, Infinity War is just something that's like, I don't know how. First of all, I don't know how they're going to top it in Endgame. It's gonna, like, they've set the bar high for themselves. But I really don't know how they're going to top themselves when Avengers 5 comes out, 5 years from now or 3 years from now, whenever it is. It's like, how do you build back up again? Because, like, the big thing about this was like, wait a minute, now the Guardians and Doctor Strange are going to be added into the mix too. It's like, what's next to be added into the mix? And I guess Disney buying Fox might mean Fantastic Four, new X-Men. So there'll be stuff, but that bar is pretty high right now.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the bar being so high, you don't really realize the characters that have built over time, like, for instance, Captain America, just, like, how powerful they are and how much that they've grown, like, not only emotionally but physically, and too. It's just that one scene where Cap is, like, holding Thanos's hand,
the glove,
and he's pushing him. I'm like, whoa, like, you just realize, like, how much heart and, like, how much of everything is put into this, and, like, that's really what you kind of you put your everything into all these characters, and to see this kind of culminate, I wonder what's gonna happen next.
And we talked about the score in Winter Soldier, and how also directed by the Russo brothers, which did Infinity War, and at that reveal moment of Bucky and Winter Soldier, they pull the score out and you're just left with that moment. And here, once the snap happens, the score goes away, and all you get is kind of like that dust, like, that sound effect of the dust, and it, like, has a chime to it.
That I had like a visceral reaction to seeing, like, Bucky. I think he was the first one to dissipate, but seeing him go away and just, like, flop to the ground and disappear, my jaw was dropped, and I was like, oh my, this is how it's going down. I'm not ready for this. And then, like, it keeps going.
It's frightening. Like, Scarlet Witch looks like she's kind of in pain.
Oh, that was fantastic.
And
the way she did
obviously Tom Holland's Peter Parker, it's like, because he has spider sense, he can feel it coming before it happens.
Right.
It's just, and apparently it was Robert Downey Jr. that kind of, like, quote unquote directed him for a better performance out of that. Yeah. And it definitely plays that to me, like, that's what haunted me. It
was a great moment.
Yeah. So then we came from Infinity War, and I don't know about you, but I was, like, emotionally exhausted. I was like, I need to think about this for a while.
Oh, yeah. I remember just, like, I think it was a couple of weeks, and we had gone to see it again and let it marinate some more, and it just didn't seem real for a really long time.
Yeah, it was like, I needed to sit with this, and I understood. It was after I watched, I was like, I get why they're not coming to Comic-Con this year to show footage of anything else. It's like, nope, you got to sit with this for a while. But they didn't let us sit with it for a while because then they gave us Ant-Man and the Wasp a couple months later. And I gotta say, like, I feel like Ant-Man was in the same boat here. Like, they schedule these Ant-Man movies to come out after huge events. So it's just like, I don't want this right now.
Yeah.
You just took away everything from me. I'm not in the mood for you, Ant-Man,
It
you
was
know?
just like a weird distraction, too.
Right.
And maybe that's what the purpose was.
I like Ant-Man and the Wasp better than I like Ant-Man. There are some criticisms I have of Ant-Man and the Wasp fix. Like, you know, one of my big things was, like, I feel like the first Ant-Man, the palette is the color palette is very, like, muted. And I get it. It's like you're doing ants, so it's like earth tones and everything. But it just feels, like, colorless and very claustrophobic. And I do feel like this movie, like, at least it got us out a little bit more. We got to see San Francisco, which I totally forgot was even the city they were in the first one.
Idea.
And, you know, we injected some color. I think we got rid of the terrible wig for Evangeline Lilly.
God, that was terrible.
We got to see the quantum realm, which was kind of cool. But ultimately, this movie it's like, it doesn't leave any sort of lasting mark with me.
Unfortunately.
It was one of those things where, like, we had just done our Marvel rewatch for Endgame, and we had gotten to Ant-Man, and we kept putting it off.
Have to watch this?
And I think I was on my phone. You were Googling or sending emails. Like, it was like, all right, as long as it's on, it counts as we're watching it.
Yeah,
right?
It's like a working lunch.
I don't even, like, hate it. I just think too, like I said, they knew Luis was the funniest character. I think they overused him a little bit.
Really? I thought it was fine.
I think the story gimmick is, like, you're going to have to find a new joke. It's kind of like if they do an Ant-Man 3, which I don't know if they will. These Ant-Mans don't make as much as the other ones do. But it's kind of like, do you remember the like penis jokes in Austin Powers where it was like, looks like and then they would cut to something else?
Yeah.
And then by Goldmember, it was kind of like just not funny anymore.
I completely disagree.
Okay. Well,
penis jokes are always funny.
Okay. Well, maybe I'm on my own penisless island over here. I just feel like, the best part of Ant-Man and the Wasp is the 1.5-minute, like, mid-credit scene where it's like, okay, that's how you're going to be in Endgame. Yeah. You know? Even, like, Michelle Pfeiffer, like, it's cool that she's in that movie, but she doesn't really do anything, so...
No, I think overall, I'm just disappointed with the way they made Ant-Man's character. It just... so... flat.
But I don't dislike Ant-Man, like, in Civil War. I feel like he's
yeah, he helps, but I guess it's like I feel the same way about Spider-Man. It's like,
now you did the weird Southern accent. You're like, I feel the same way about Spider-Man. It's contagious. Well, I don't know that damn Spider-Man.
As we're talking about Ant-Man too, I'm just starting to get so drained and loopy. They're flat characters. They don't have a ton of motivation. I guess, like, his motivation is his daughter.
She's great. You talk about kid actors that, like, don't bother me. That girl's really cute.
Is it weird that I really like the stepdad?
No, he's funny.
Yeah, I think he's, like, one of my favorite characters in Ant-Man, and just I love that they, like, all love each other suddenly. And I was like, yeah, let's do more of that.
I think the Cassie and that family is what I like about Ant-Man and the Wasp the most. Like, it's so cute when she's like, I could be your partner, and he laughs. She's like, don't laugh at me.
I know, she's adorable.
She's adorable, and I'm with you. Like, that kid from Iron Man 3, I'm like, get out of this movie. I hate you. You are ruining everything. But I like Cassie and Ant-Man and the Wasp, so... that's probably, like, the best part for me, but ultimately it's like, I'm not going to watch that one if I'm just randomly want to put a Marvel movie
it's
on.
only going to be in the service of watching it for the purpose of a later
academic purposes.
Yeah. Like, what happened in this?
So that finally brings us to the last movie before... Avengers Endgame hits theaters, and that is Captain Marvel. Now, just like Black Panther, this also tends to be a cultural milestone. It's Marvel's first female-led superhero movie. Unlike Black Panther, this one doesn't hit the mark for me.
Yeah, it's so funny. We watched this when did we go see this?
We saw it opening weekend initially,
and then we saw it yesterday.
And then we saw it, which was, I don't know when you guys are listening to this, but yesterday for you will be like the week before Endgame opens.
Yeah, and I liked it the first time I saw it. The second time, I was terribly bored.
Yeah, look, here's the thing. I think Captain Marvel is kind of like Ant-Man in the sense that it's like, it almost felt obligatory. Like, we just have to get this out of the way so you know who she is for Endgame.
I tend to rate movies based on rewatchability, and I think that's why I don't like this one as much, is because it doesn't have that factor.
I don't have any problems with Brie Larson.
I like Brie Larson. I did not think she was a good fit for this role.
Why?
I felt that way before I saw the movie and even after. She, I guess I'll compare it to like Wonder Woman, where I think there's something really interesting and, like, I hate to say it this way, but it's like there's like a sexiness, not like straight sexiness about like Wonder Woman,
right.
Like she looks sexy, but there's exotic, I think is the way I'll put it, like something about Gal Gadot, where she just seems like she has more to her, and I don't know why, but Brie Larson doesn't feel as exotic to me as like to fill that character role. I want something a little bit more like off about her.
I think I don't know if exotic, but it's like Gal Gadot.
I don't know how to put it.
She has like an X factor.
That's what it is. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, it's like an intangible X factor where I believe it, like, and here's the thing, and it's tough for me to say as like a straight white male, because I also realize that a lot of the things in this movie were not meant like for me, but I just feel like it's like, whereas Wonder Woman is an aggressive, amazing, badass hero who happens to be a woman, great. But Captain Marvel has these themes in it that, like, I totally think, like, the feminist, like, themes in this movie's great. That's no problem.
That was good.
But they hit it so squarely
Yeah.
that it feels borderline like patronizing. Like to me, like the biggest like eye roll is the "I'm Just a Girl" song playing when she gets her powers. It's like, guys, like this is almost borderline parody. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Like pull it back. You don't have to be so obtuse about it, you know?
And you know what it is? There's an immaturity about it that I think that's what kind of takes me away from like the whole girl power thing, or like, you know, really celebrating like a really powerful woman superhero is, and I don't know if it's the way Brie Larson's playing it or the character itself, but for as much as she's been through, she doesn't really seem to be that, I don't know, that like emotionally smart about things. I don't know. It just falls flat for me.
Yeah, I think this movie is trying to accomplish a lot. The other thing about this movie is like they do such a clumsy job of being like, remember the 90s? We're in the 90s. Remember this song? Because that song's from the 90s. It's
I actually kind of like that. Like, I love the 90s, but
I know. Look, we all love the 90s.
Yeah.
All of us 90s kids love the 90s. But it's like, just because you needle drop Kurt Cobain or you needle drop TLC in the middle of the movie doesn't just like, that doesn't mean like, hey, we're in the 90s. You know what I mean? Like, why is this movie set in the 90s other than to just like half-ass explain why she's not around for the other Avengers movies?
I think the biggest problems I had were the relationships she had with other characters. It's the relationship she had with like her best friend that she like got reacquainted with. Yeah. I did not feel any chemistry with them. I was like, and I guess that makes sense because like she doesn't remember her, but like suddenly she remembers everything, and it just felt so cold and fake to me.
Yeah,
it wasn't like a Captain America like Bucky Barnes reacquaintance and, you know, realizing who they were. Like, and I wish it was more emotional like that. because it seems like it's a similar relationship.
Yeah, some of the dialogue, again, that they make, like, some of the dialogue's very clunky, and some of it's exposition, and some of it is, like I said, just, like, 90s, like, we have to keep, like, oh, when the little girl's like, what are you going to do? Just stay home with me and sit on the couch and watch the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air? It's like, I get it! You're in the 90s! Stop randomly dropping 90s things in. It's so annoying.
What did you refer to this movie as? Like member berries?
Oh, yeah, Captain Member Berries.
That's like, totally what it was.
It's Captain Member Berries. And the like, if I'm going to really put on like my nerd hat here, like this does like, at this point, it does muddy up some of the continuity of like what we've expect from Marvel. Like, you know, in the Avengers, Nick Fury's basically says that they're making weapons out of the Tesseract because of what Thor did. Mm-hmm. And he's like, now we know that we're not alone. It's like, bro, you were on a spaceship like 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. Like, you should have made this stuff a long time ago. I also think it's super lame that a cat scratched his eye out.
Oh, God. That really was the worst for me. I was like, really? That's how it happened? Are you sure? And what happened to that cat? That's what I want to know.
I don't know. Look, if a cat scratched or a flurkin scratched my eye out, I'm not buying it a cute little bed and putting it in my office. I'm like, kill that thing.
Yeah, how is he not upset about that?
I don't know. That was it's kind of like how you said, like, Captain Marvel just kind of was like, all right, whatever. Like, Nick Fury in this movie is kind of like, all right, whatever. I guess my eye's just gone now. You know? Well, all right, whatever. I guess there's just aliens now.
They didn't really explain it. Like, the best way they explained, like, his eye's now gone is because, like, oh, hey, look at these, like, fake eyes. He never actually replaces his fake eye, which we come to find out in, like, some other... What's that other movie?
Winter Soldier, where he takes the patch off and
so
it's,
like,
scratched. Yeah.
That was how you explained that? Okay, great. Yeah, I you know what the saving part of this movie was for me was the Skrulls storyline.
Oh, the Skrulls were great. And it's funny because in the comics, the Skrulls are really evil. So, like, I didn't see that twist coming.
Yeah.
And I thought Ben Mendelsohn was fantastic as Talos. Yeah. I thought he was so good. And he's I love, too, that he doesn't try to, like, be like, see, I'm a great guy. He's like, look, it's war. My hands are bloody too. I've done things, but like I'm really just trying to do this for my family. Yeah. Like, that was great.
He was perfect, and then like you just have Jude Law, who was just a dick throughout, and
Jude Law like isn't in the movie that much when you really think about it. That's the thing. It's like this movie is a confusing first 20 minutes. Like it was a little less confusing the second time because I knew it was coming, but the first time I watched it, I was like, "What is happening? I'm so confused."
Yeah.
And then the second act is so boring. Nothing happens. Because that train sequence is really cool.
Yeah.
And then there's no action until the very end of the movie where it's just like completely overpowered.
Like, I thought it was cool when she discovered who she was. I think that was an
I like the stand-up montage of her keep standing up throughout the years. That was really cool. And then they go a step too far by playing just a girl.
I know. It just...
I wanted to love this movie.
I wanted to like Captain Marvel, but I knew from the trailers I wasn't. And even just like hearing the storyline before any trailers came out, I was just like, I'm not going to like this.
Well, I do wonder too, because it's like, you know, Captain America, the first of it. They're saying that Captain Marvel is going to be kind of the new leader going forward and the new anchor. But had you said Captain America was going to be the anchor of the MCU after the first Avenger, you might have had the same response. So I'm wondering
I did, actually.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this is one of those things where it's like she just has to
grow into
the character, and we have to grow into her being. And it's tough. Look, not even for Captain Marvel, for any character that they would anchor the MCU around, if we do lose Tony or Cap, like, it's big shoes to fill. It's going to be tough to have an Avengers lineup if they're potentially not in it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, of course, I'll still give Captain Marvel a chance for the other ones. And yeah, like you said, maybe she'll grow into it and be a stronger character. But I could do without watching her origin story again.
Yeah, that's one that I'll put it in the Ant-Man list of probably won't check out again. All right, we have talked every single Marvel movie that has been released to date. It's time to put some number rankings on these. So... you go first. Start from 21 and go all the way up to number 1.
Starting from 21, my least favorite is Thor 2.
Okay.
The Dark World. Right above that, Thor 1. They're just both down there.
Toiling at the bottom.
19 is Incredible Hulk. 18 Ant-Man, the first Ant-Man, 17 Ant-Man and the Wasp, 16 Captain Marvel, 15 Spider-Man Homecoming, 14 Iron Man 2, 13 Iron Man 3, 12 Iron Man 1, 11 Captain America First Avenger, 10 is Doctor Strange, 9 is Winter Soldier, 8 Black Panther, 7 Thor Ragnarok, 6 Ultron, number 5 is the first Avengers movie, 4 Guardians 1, 3 Infinity War, 2 Civil War, and my favorite, Guardians 2.
All right, that's a pretty solid, some might call it slightly controversial ranking, but I get it. I like it. I like that after I've heard everything you've had to say, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
So here's mine. At the very bottom, bringing up the rear, Ant-Man.
Yeah.
At number 20, Iron Man 3. Number 19, Captain Marvel. Number 18, Thor the Dark World. 17, The Incredible Hulk. 16, Ant-Man and the Wasp. 15, Iron Man 2. 14, Spider-Man Homecoming. 13, Captain America, The First Avenger. Number 12, Avengers Age of Ultron. Number 11, Black Panther. Number 10, Doctor Strange. Number 9, Iron Man 1. Number 8, Thor 1. Number 7, Thor Ragnarok. 6, The Winter Soldier. 5, Guardians of the Galaxy 1. 4, Guardians of the Galaxy 2. 3, Infinity War. 2, Civil War. And my number 1 all-time favorite Marvel movie, still the one to beat for me, the first Avengers movie. I don't think it's going to be tough for anything.
You and I have the same 2 and 3.
We also I think have like the same like either 6 or like 12 or something.
Oh wow, you really looked at it.
Yeah. I think it's going to be hard for me to ever take away that feeling of that first Avengers movie. Like it was like I said, it was like an event. It was a moment in time. It was seeing these characters together. Like I don't know of anything that could ever really truly recreate that feeling.
Yeah. What are your expectations for Endgame? I mean, you've been talking about it to me like for like months, like every day, like 16 days till Endgame. Like
no, and
waking
now,
up every morning.
As of today, we're down to 5 days till Endgame.
Oh goodness.
I expect kind of like I expect an ending, and I think that's kind of where I know that they're taking us. And it's funny because, you know, these comic book movies and comic books in general, they're just these long storylines that never, it's like a soap opera. It never really ends. But I think film is a different medium, and I think you have to give this an ending. And I kind of hope that, you know, they call these first 22 movies the Infinity Saga. And I hope that it feels like a solid ending that doesn't betray any of these characters. If we have to see some of them go, then I hope it's in service of like a really great moment, you know?
I agree. I feel like there are going to be a lot of people that are going to say, why does it have to end? But I think it needs to. And as sad as I am going to be to see some characters potentially leave, I think it's all for, it all needs to happen.
Yeah, I think, you know, if no one, look, I'm not saying like dying or killing a character is the only way to give them closure, but I think for some of them, like, there has to be stakes to this at the end of the day. Like, there has to be some sort of toll, or else, like, it's kind of like why comic books, it's like it just goes on forever and no one's ever dead, we'll just bring them back, you know, and it loses a lot. I feel like if we've invested this much, we need to see some real consequences. Like, losing half the universe was a lot, and I feel like some of these characters that we really love, we love seeing them so much, but they are they're nearing the end of their character arcs,
right,
to the point where, like, I think that's what bothers me so much about Iron Man 3 is that, like, Tony kind of reached his natural ending point in Iron Man 3, and then they had to regress the character in order to keep it going, and he had to unlearn lessons he's learned. And I think we've gotten to a point where it's like, if these characters have hit their natural ending point, then it's time to end it.
Yeah. No, you're right.
So that does it for a very, very supersized episode, very special episode. Thank you so much, Mrs. Business.
Thank you for having me.
Taking time out of your... and thank you for finally going to these Marvel movies after me basically putting a figurative gun to your head and making you watch them.
Happy to do it with you.
So we are back on our normal schedule next week with we're talking Star Trek Generations with Mr. Star Trek, Scott Mantz. Still coming this season. Like I said, I'm going to be doing Iron Man 3 with former, you know him from IGN, from Marvel, and now he's part of Fandom, Eric Goldman. That's all coming up on the show. You can hit me up on Twitter at Billy A. Patterson. And remember, rate and review the show. Guys, I'm just going to say it. We are in the Endgame now.